Hello everyone, glad to have you here. If this is your first time, don't forget to subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories like this. Now get comfortable, it's time to dive into the story. Zombie Outbreak Alcatraz, 12 hours of survival. Now, let's get started. Hey there survivors, thanks for tuning into tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's get started. If you can hear this, I'm broadcasting from what's left of Relay Point Sierra 12, once known as the back end of Bunker 12's emergency substation. The outer doors are still sealed, the air is dry, and the static's mostly clean. So if your receiver is strong enough and you're still breathing, this frequency is for you. No password, no encryption, just a voice. My name's Adam Kessler. I'm 25. I was born in a world that was already broken. Born in a storm shelter that flooded 2 weeks later. My mother didn't make it. I grew up in a scrapyard compound called Kelmar's Rest, just northeast of what used to be Houston. 94 of us lived there, give or take. Last count was 88. I haven't been back in 23 days. So I don't know how many are still left. I'm not a soldier, not a scientist. I'm just someone who started piecing things together after a lifetime of picking over dead places. This voice isn't a warning. Not yet. It's a record for whoever finds it. 3 weeks ago, I caught something strange on the band. Shortwave burst, 5-note digital handshake, then silence. Thought it was noise, then it came again. Same timing. I ran it through the old NASA Spectrum decoder. Jerry helped me rebuild. It resolved into a compressed packet header. The tag said, urgent B12 to B2. 2 bunkers, one reaching out to the other. I didn't even know they were still online. Bunker 2 was one of the deep command sites. Nobody outside the old military structure knew where it was. But Bunker 12, it was supposed to be scrubbed, lost to infection, like the others. Most people don't talk about the bunkers anymore. It's been 50 years since the outbreak. The first wave of the virus started in the north and swept down like winter. They say it came from space, an asteroid fragment, scorched but not sterile. Animals started dying first, then turning, then people. Back then, people still had satellites, comms, field hospitals. That all fell apart by year 5. The bunkers, at least 20 across the old US, were built before the world even knew what was coming. Not just to withstand nuclear winter, but long-term collapse. Micro-reactors, sealed greenhouses, digital vaults, places for the right people to wait it out. Politicians, defense scientists, command officers, corporate engineers. 8 bunkers failed fast. Mutiny, air system collapse, radiation breaches. 4 went quiet, 2 went dark from infection. 3 were captured last I heard by factions that still believed the government could be rebuilt in their image. The rest silent until now. The message wasn't meant for me, but I broke its encryption anyway. What I heard wasn't a beacon, it was a plea. The voice on the transmission was a woman, calm, steady, but fraying at the edges. She didn't say her name. She said this: confirm broadcast, emergency override, Bunker 12 sustaining interior breach in Subal Sea, requesting assistance, last recorded human presence. 87, remaining personnel. 9, systems degrading, containment failing, requesting evacuation corridor authorization. Bunker 2, please respond. We are not infected, we are not compromised. Then silence. She repeated it every 6 hours for 3 days. No answer came. I did something reckless. I transmitted back. Didn't expect anything. But on day 4, the static cracked. And her voice returned. Shorter, harsher, less hope in it. You're not Bunker 2. Who are you? I told her the truth, where I was, what I'd found, how I got her signal. She paused, then asked if I could follow instructions. Said there was a secondary maintenance hatch outside the city ruins beneath a collapsed highway junction. If I could reach it, and if I wasn't followed, she'd unlock it. She promised access to their archives, 50 years of knowledge, pre-outbreak research, infrastructure records, maybe even weather satellites, still feeding live data. She didn't offer food or protection, just the truth. That was enough for me. Only 2 people volunteered to come with me. Daniel, a mechanic who rebuilt our turbine gearboxes using lawnmower parts and a melted-down shopping cart. And Maya, who once operated a forward listening post closer to Amarillo before her own compound was overrun. She doesn't talk much, just carries that old bolt action and listens to static like it might speak back someday. We left Kelmar's Rest quietly. Didn't want to draw the wrong kind of attention. The kind that watches through broken binoculars and trades bullets for gasoline. The road was quiet, too quiet. The only signs of life came from the sky. Drones, not ours, not homemade. One of them had a burnt, scorched fuselage with a faint US emblem still visible beneath the grime. It didn't linger long, just buzzed overhead, scanned with a green cone of light, then banked hard west. That made mine nervous. We reached the hatch 3 days later. It was where she said it would be, recessed under a collapsed highway flyover, half buried in broken concrete and kudzu. No tracks nearby, no movement. Daniel cut through the outer mesh with a rebar saw. It took hours. The code she gave me worked. The hatch opened. We went down. That was 22 days ago, and that's where I'm broadcasting from now, somewhere beneath the bones of what used to be America. This place isn't dead. Not entirely, but it is empty. I'll tell you what we found next time if I still have power, and if nothing, Anne. Swears this frequency first. This is Kessler. Keep your dial steady. I'll keep going while the solar array feeds the backup. Wind's been low this week, and most of the grid conduits here are brittle with age, half crumbled in their mounts. But the uplink still pings green every 6 minutes, and until that light dies, I'll keep transmitting. You maybe wanted to know what we found when we entered, so this is what we have now. The hatch wasn't designed for human traffic. It was a maintenance shaft, narrow, steep, layered with dust so thick it muffled our boots. The air smelled like old plastic and buried wires. No alarms, no greeting, just that long descent past corroded handrails and burnt-out LEDs that hadn't flickered in decades. We emerged into a subsurface tunnel just wide enough to walk 3 across. The ceiling curved low, arched like a storm drain, but without any drainage. It was dry, dead air. Maya scanned the corners while Daniel marked our path with that chalk powder he kept in his belt tin. At the first junction, we found the remnants of something meant to crawl. Not human, not machine. The floor had been scraped in wide, staggered patterns. Dried sludge pulled in the low spots. No footprints, just trails. The radio signal got stronger near the second hatch. Not louder, clearer. We found a wall panel with a cracked biometric pad and keypad. I entered the code she gave me. It didn't respond at first. Then, with a slow shudder, the door cracked open about 1/2 meter. Air rushed out, warm and stale like something stored too long in a jar. The smell wasn't rot, not quite, just used, thick with metal and oil and something beneath that I still can't name. Inside was chaos, but not the loud kind, more like abandonment frozen mid-step. The main corridor, Sector A, was lit by emergency strips low on the wall. Just enough to see where the path turned, but not enough to see. Ewot waited around the corners. Half the ceiling panels were gone, some dangling by cords. The floor had streaks, smudges, not fresh but not dusted over either. Somewhere deep in the hall, a door hissed shut on its own, just once, then nothing. We swept the first 2 sectors room by room. Sector A was supposed to be living quarters. Now it looked more like a holding cell. We found bunks still made, lockers sealed shut with emergency tape, cans of preserved food spilled from a cracked storage unit. One room had a mural on the wall, a painted tree with names carved into its trunk. Handprints in children's paint dotted the branches. Underneath was written, "Next spring will come." No dates, just that line. We didn't speak for a while after that. The third room we breached had a corpse, male, mid-40s. He wore a jumpsuit labelled Waste Systems Ops, no sign of trauma, just lying in the corner, curled like he'd tried to sleep through something. Maya checked the body. No bites, no bruises, just a badge, half buried in his sleeve cuff. The name was Reynolds. The card had a 3-digit code and a maintenance override key embedded in the corner. Daniel suggested we find the radio tower access next. I agreed. The signal was bouncing from somewhere deeper, probably the main operations hub. We had to descend 2 more levels to find it. The elevators were still dead, so we took the service ladders. Every step down sounded like we were waking up the place. We reached the control level on the evening of day 1. Power was weaker there, the walls were colder, the hallway lights blinked slower like dying pulses. We passed a sealed door marked Containment Medical Quarantine. It was welded shut from the outside. I didn't try to open it. Beyond it, the corridor widened. A massive door bore the words Communications Core and Data Control. The keypad beside it blinked red. I tried Reynolds's card. It unlocked on the 3rd attempt. Inside was the broadcast room. That's where I'm sitting now. It's lined with old EW World consoles, monitors with cracked bezels, a desk with a padded armrest worn down to the foam. The main chair was overturned. Beside it, slumped against the wall, was the source of the voice I heard over the radio. A woman, pale, still wearing the headset. Her badge read, "Our Marcel Communications Officer." There was no blood, no visible wounds, just her and the headset still wired into the console. The last broadcast log was 2 days old. She kept transmitting even after the others fell silent. I didn't disturb her, just gently slid the headset free, set it on the table and took her seat. From there I accessed the last recorded messages. Most were fragments, emergency calls, sector logs, old communications between bunkers, but one caught my attention, an internal voice memo time-stamped. 3 weeks ago it played automatically when I opened the storage grid. Marcel log 47, it's just me now, Brooks is gone. Took his own oxygen line offline yesterday. I can't access food storage. It's under lockdown after the breach. If anyone hears this, we weren't warned. They told us containment had been maintained, but it was already in the air. The spores, they weren't in the waste vents like we thought. They were latent, dormant. Someone activated a backup filtration unit from the outside, and it pushed them into main circulation. If that wasn't sabotage, I don't know what it was. This bunker wasn't meant to be saved, it was meant to be studied, and the recording cut out there. No sign of Brooks, no log of what spores she meant. Just the implication that someone triggered a breach from outside, or worse, from one of the other bunkers. The servers still held terabytes of log data. Security required biometric confirmation. Marcel's print worked for low-level files, but the deeper archives were tied to higher clearance profiles. I needed another badge. We slept in shifts for the next 3 nights. Cleared rooms in pairs, rigged traps across corridors with leftover motion wires and tin cans. No one spoke much. Daniel kept working on routing power to more sectors. Maya searched for surviving maps and schematics. I focused on extracting what I could from the radio and comms archives. One file from Bunker 2 was only half corrupted. It was a directive memo. Date year 7 after the outbreak. Per executive command, no support is to be extended to outer-tier bunkers under biohazard protocol. Data acquisition takes precedence. Survivors beyond Tier 1 are non-essential unless part of strategic continuity plan. Repeat, no surface extraction. All compromised zones are to be observed, not retrieved. So that's how it was. Not failure design. Maybe not everyone inside those bunkers agreed with it. Maybe someone tried to warn the others. Or maybe someone down here still believed we were expendable. We've started unlocking more of the bunker's lower levels. Found a hydroponics bay choked with mold. Rows of dead crops under flickering lamps. Found a weapons cache. Small arms, mostly old-gen slug rifles. And a couple pulse-frame prototypes too degraded to fire. No ammo for most, but it means they expected to defend this place. From what, or from who? Tomorrow, I'll tell you what we found near the reactor chamber. It wasn't empty. Keep listening. I'll keep recording. Someone has to. You're listening to the voice of someone still below. Adam Kessler, Bunker 12. If you can hear me, don't trust the silence. It hides more than the dead. It hides what they built before the world burned. The deeper we go, the colder it gets. Not just the air, but the feeling in your skin, your eyes, the back of your throat. It's not just the temperature, it's the stillness, the pressure. Like the deeper levels were built, not just to hide people from the world, but to keep something in. Something that was never supposed to see daylight again. I said I'd tell you what we found near the reactor chamber. I'm not sure I should, but I will. The entrance to the lower core was locked down when we first arrived. Daniel rerouted power through a fuse box the size of a desk drawer and managed to get the blast doors open halfway. We had to wedge them apart with a bent table frame and pry through one at a time. What waited beyond wasn't what we expected. I thought we'd find rows of reactors humming with residual heat, coolant systems covered in warning labels. Instead, we found silence and dark, interrupted only by the drip of condensation from the overhead pipes. The reactors were cold, fully shut down. Emergency power was being drawn from a small backup turbine system in the subfloor. We didn't even know it existed until Daniel spotted the markings. But that wasn't the strange part. What we found in the hallway, just past the coolant tanks, was worse. There were cages, not cells, not storage lockers. Cages, steel-barred, reinforced with magnetic seals, each about the size of a freight elevator car. Some were still locked, others hung open. Inside one, we found the remains of a bunk cot, torn blankets and chains mounted into the walls. Another had blood on the floor that had dried into spiderweb patterns. We found restraints, observation chairs, a cracked tablet mounted to a wall terminal with no power. Maya said nothing, just backed out and kept watch while I tried to power up the nearby console. It flickered, showed static, then a few lines of system data. Not much, but enough to confirm this area had been tagged for Containment Level 4 Hostile Biopersistence. The last access date just over 6 weeks ago, meaning someone had been down there recently. We moved deeper cautiously. Past the cages, we found a thick glass viewing panel set into a reinforced wall. Beyond it, another room, medical beds, scanners, monitoring equipment, all powered down. Most of the beds were empty, but one had a dark shape beneath a full body restraint sheet. I didn't go in, I didn't want to know. On the opposite wall was a data port with a faint green light. It was the only device in the whole area still running, probably drawing from an isolated line. We plugged in the patched receiver I'd built, using parts from the old comm station upstairs. It took a few minutes to initialize, then a single file appeared. It wasn't encrypted, it wasn't labeled. It just said, "Entry Doctor for Hayden Elner." The recording was audio only. I played it in that room with the others watching the dark corners. Here's what he said. Day 3, Phase 2. Subject 0 remains unresponsive. Neural activity low but present. Motor reflexes triggered by external stimuli. No vocalization. Infection vector appears stable, but has not progressed beyond known behavior patterns. Attempted stimulus with light, scent, sound, no reaction outside of baseline hostility. Sedation no longer effective. Recommendation: euthanize subject, Begin genetic sampling for strain replication. Then, silence. The file ended. Maya looked at me. Her expression didn't change, but she did something she rarely does. She spoke first. They were testing the virus, she said. Not curing it, studying it. I nodded, but I couldn't stop thinking about the word replication. Why would you replicate something like this unless you were trying to engineer it? We didn't sleep that night. Secured the hallway with makeshift barriers, posted shifts. The silence in that section of the bunker was different, not the silence of abandonment. It was thick, waiting, like the rooms remembered what they'd held and weren't done with it yet. We left early the next day and locked it behind us. I haven't told the others yet, but I pulled another file from that same console before we left. One that wasn't audio. It was a map, not of this bunker of others, including one that isn't listed in any of the old military archives. We've recovered. No name, no designation, just coordinates and a single tag in red. Quarantine site external directive. It's somewhere in the old southwest, far beyond our current range. But the implication is clear. There's another site, one even more isolated than this, possibly still active. I don't know what to make of that yet. I'm not even sure I should believe it. The document could be planted, corrupted, or worse. Bait, but it's there, a possibility I can't ignore. Meanwhile, the systems here are slowly failing. Air scrubbers in Sector C are clogged. We've shut off 2 auxiliary rooms to conserve energy. The storage wing has been sealed since we arrived, and I've been hesitant to open it. If there's food inside, it could change everything. But if it's contaminated, like the med officer said, then opening it could doom the entire structure. Daniel wants to try. He thinks we can build an airlock using the old decon chamber. 2 holes over. Maya disagrees, says we should leave it sealed and begin rationing what little we have. They're both right, and that's the problem. We haven't seen any infected in nearly a week, not in the halls, not near the sealed doors. The few we encountered early on were thin, dried, barely functional. It's possible the isolated air and limited movement starved them out, or maybe they migrated to warmer sections when the power failed. But we still hear them sometimes, low clicks echoing from ventilation shafts, scrapes along the reinforced doors. Not constant, just enough to remind us we're not alone. I've started thinking about Marcel, about how she's stayed here alone, trying to reach someone who never answered. I wonder how long she kept talking into the void before she realized no one was coming. I wonder if that'll be me one day. The data I've managed to extract from the communications logs paints a picture that's hard to look at. Not just of collapse, but of intentional collapse. Messages from Bunker 8 speak of trial scenarios, control failures, and secondary dispersal zones. One log mentions something called OP Evergreen, a last-ditch continuity plan meant to rebuild civilization using only selected genetic lines. No details, no list of participants, just the name buried in a corrupted memo. It's almost as if someone knew the world would fall, not feared it, planned for it, and let it happen anyway. I can't confirm any of this yet, but it feels too deliberate to ignore. What does this mean for Kelmar's rest, for the other settlements still surviving on scraps and solar power, for the children being born now who've never seen a clean sky or a full meal? That's why I'm still broadcasting, not because I believe someone will swoop down from the clouds and fix it all, not because I think there's a cure waiting in some sealed vault, but because if we don't know what happened, if we don't learn from it, then we'll just keep walking in the dark until we vanish, like the ones who came before. I'll keep searching the archives. I'll keep reporting what I find. If you're out there, if you're listening, then send something back, anything, a tone, a burst, a name. So I know I'm not alone down here with the ghosts of a dead government and the things it left behind. More soon, stay steady. It's been 36 hours since we opened the storage wing. We used the decontamination chamber as planned, sealed the entrance behind us, vented the room, flushed the air twice with the remaining filters from the reactor level, and waited. Nothing moved, no sound, no breach. Just silence pressing against the sealed door like the entire bunker held its breath with us. The access terminal had no power. Daniel had to reroute a trickle from the comms room just to trip the magnetic locks. When the bolts finally released, the door swung open less than a foot and jammed. We forced it with crowbars wrapped in tape, pushing slowly, carefully, unsure what we were walking into. Inside Yao, rows of sealed crates, government issued. Everything marked with faded tags, nutrient-rationed, civilian, water filtration units, cryovay seeds, batch 2037A. The room smelled like metal and dry plastic, like something that had been waiting a long time. We checked for signs of breach. No broken seals, no blood, no claw marks, nothing out of place until we got to the back wall. Tucked behind the last row of crates was a body not infected, not decayed, preserved by the cold of the chamber and the airtight systems. He was dressed in a technician's uniform, a utility knife still gripped in one hand. His other hand held a small canister, half buried in the folds of his coat. Daniel lifted it and read the label. Airborne pathogen, Class 3, sample only, do not open. The seal was broken. We froze. There was no visible damage to the body. No sign of exposure beyond a faint, unnatural discoloration in the eyes. Milky, not the kind you see in the infected. We backed out slowly and sealed the chamber again, reinforcing it with a second layer of scrap sheet metal and epoxy foam. Maya believes he did it on purpose, that he released whatever was in the canister, maybe as part of the test, maybe to sabotage something, maybe to end something. We'll never know, but I'm not so sure he knew what was in that vial. We found no logs with his name, no entry in the security files, no video footage. It's as if he wasn't supposed to exist at all. Still, the supplies in the chamber were intact. We catalogued what we could without opening too much. Enough dried ration packets to last 3 people nearly a year if we stretch them. More if we can restart the hydroponics bay and clean the mold out. Daniel thinks it's possible. We found an old sterilization wand in the medical bay. Needs a replacement core, though that's still missing. The cryovolt seeds are still viable, according to the status panel. Grains, greens, even some fruit-bearing strains. Not enough to feed hundreds, but enough to start something again if we're careful. The deeper we dig, the more this place feels like a time capsule buried in panic. As if the last few who stayed behind knew no one would come and left behind whatever they could, hoping someone like us might find it. But not all discoveries are hopeful. Earlier today, while searching through the upper labs, Maya found a hand-tool-cranked data terminal embedded in a reinforced workbench. No network uplink, just a local cache drive and a slot for encoded cards. It looked unused for years. The dust had settled around it, but someone had carved a message into the surface of the desk. Don't go to Bunker 2. We don't know who left that. There's no name, no context, just those 5 words. It could have been a warning, a personal regret, or something worse. Confirmation of what I've started to suspect. That Bunker 2 wasn't the command center it claimed to be, that it might have been the source. I'm beginning to see a pattern in the archived logs, though much of it is fragmented. The early messages between bunkers, what few remain, show clear signs of distrust, warnings to one another to change encryption, code phrases like internal compromise, black entries, and fabricated spore risk. One transmission from Bunker 9 described a supply drop marked as humanitarian that arrived half empty and contained sealed vials of a substance no one had requested. A few days later, all comms from Bunker 9 ceased. No confirmation of breach, no call for help, just silence. Why would a secure bunker send unrequested biological samples to another? And why would the recipient go quiet right after? The more I look, the more I believe what we're piecing together wasn't a coordinated survival effort. It was a containment strategy. Not for the infected, but for people. People on the surface. People in the outer tier bunkers. People who weren't on whatever list decided who mattered. It makes sense in a cruel way. If the infection couldn't be stopped, but the knowledge of its origins could cause unrest, the best option for those at the top would be to control the story, let the virus burn itself out, and re-emerge when the world was quiet again. That raises a question I've been avoiding. What if the zombie virus never mutated because it wasn't supposed to? We've always been told that it was alien, that it came from space, an asteroid or a spore or something no one could trace. That story held up for decades. People stopped asking where it came from and started asking how to survive it. But what if that was the point? What if the story was planted from the beginning to keep people from looking too close? There's a document in the comms archive I'm still trying to decode. It references something called Strain Delta Zero with a date, almost 2 years before the asteroid ever made landfall. 2 years. That would place it before the collapse of the European Unified Union, before the last open press briefing, before the internet blackouts, before the world shut its eyes. If that's true, then this thing didn't come from the stars. It came from us, from someone. I don't have the whole picture yet. Maybe I never will, but I can't ignore the signs. We've stabilized power for now. Daniel patched the auxiliary cores into a rotation cycle. One comes online while the other cools. It gives us about 6 more hours of full operation each day. Enough to light the main sectors, run air filtration, and power the transmitter. The ventilation system still a risk. We've sealed the unused shafts with mesh and debris, but the groans we heard 2 nights ago came from somewhere inside the system, and we don't have the tools to trace them. We're running low on battery cells for the handhelds. I've started rationing comms time. If the signal drops, I'll fall back to analog tape and broadcast delay. I know this all sounds fragmented. That's because it is. I'm not telling you everything at once, not because I want to hold back, but because that's how I'm finding it. Piece by piece, thread by thread. Each corridor, each drawer, each terminal reveals a little more. The full truth is buried in layers of rust and silence, but I'm getting closer to understanding what this place was really for, closer to understanding why we were left behind, and maybe closer to something else. Something that's still moving out there. Keep your radios on more soon. This is Kessler, still transmitting, still digging. If you're hearing this, stay with me. The story is deeper than we thought. We found something last night. Not a person, not a corpse, not exactly a message either. At least not one someone left for us intentionally. We were tracing auxiliary ventilation lines from Sector D toward what looked like an old logistics corridor. The map we're working from, stitched together from overlapping maintenance blueprints and Daniel's reconstructions, indicated a sealed equipment access point just before the storage zone curve. But when we got there, the wall panel had already been forced open from the inside. Someone had crawled through, or something had forced its way out. The duct space was narrow, too small for anyone in gear to pass through easily. I wouldn't have noticed anything at all if the light from my shoulder lamp hadn't bounced against something shiny wedged between 2 bolts. A coin bent in half like it had been jammed there on purpose. US Mint 2064. The kind minted just before the last recession, back when they were trying to inspire confidence with slogans etched along the rim. This one read, "The future is stable." That coin was sitting in a place no one should have had access to. I shone the light deeper into the duct and saw scratch marks, not teeth, not claws, fingernails. Someone had tried to claw their way through years ago. The dust was undisturbed, the smears long dried, and just past that, about 10 misses in, we found the first set of boot prints I've seen since. Key entering the bunker. That didn't belong to us. I'm not sure how I missed it earlier. They were faint, but the pattern was wrong. Military issue grip tread, worn almost flat. Not the thick soles Daniel wears or the lighter tread Maya prefers. The prince crossed from the corridor into the unpowered security wing, where most of the lockdown protocols are still hard-coded into the control panels. That section was sealed when we arrived, and we haven't had the power to breach it safely yet. But someone had already been in there, and they came from inside. It's forcing me to reevaluate what I thought I understood about this place. Every assumption I made that the bunker was sealed after the outbreak, that the few survivors like Marcel had died alone, that we were the first to breach the structure in years, it may not hold up. If someone survived longer, if they moved through this place after Marcel stopped transmitting, then there's a chance they left more behind, more than just equipment, more than just risk, maybe records, maybe intent. Daniel's pushing to open the security wing tomorrow. He thinks he can reroute just enough power without collapsing the grid. I told him to hold off one more day. I want to run a sweep of Sector E first. We haven't searched it thoroughly, and it connects too closely to the breached vent lines. If something's still inside this facility, I'd rather know before we open another box we can't close. Meanwhile, I've been reading more of the low-clearance documents from the communications terminal. Most are damaged, some beyond recognition, but a few logs remain surprisingly intact. One was a weekly report from a communications technician, likely Marcel herself, based on the tone and signature line. She was relaying data between external scout teams and the bunker command chain. According to the report, dated roughly 12 years after the outbreak, at least 4 bunkers were still believed to be active at the time. Not 20, not even 10, 4. Bunker 2, listed only by designation Sierra Prime, was confirmed to be self-sufficient with minimal outbound transmissions. No mention of survivors, no open communication. Bunker 12, this one was marked as Tier 3 observation node. The other 2 were listed only by code, Javelin and Garnet, no coordinates, just raw data pings, and one note redacted but partially restored. Javelin response protocol proved under Directive 91H. Do not engage. What was Javelin, where was it, and why was engagement prohibited? Whatever the answers, they weren't in Marcel's level of clearance, but that's not what's been bothering me. It's a brief side note, an annotation Marcel made by hand in the margin of the printed scan in faded ink. Hard to read unless you tilt the page in the right light. It reads, "It's a cycle, that's why it never spreads too far." That sentence hit me harder than the reports about bunker losses or failed supply drops, because it implies something no one wants to admit, that this wasn't an uncontrolled outbreak. It was managed, controlled, at a distance, burned when necessary, contained when convenient, allowed to simmer. Just enough to prevent recovery, just enough to prevent rebirth, like a rot beneath the surface. Never fully wiped out, never fully allowed to grow. Why? Who benefits from a world that's always 1 week away from total collapse? I don't have the answers, just the questions. More of them every day. The bunker's internal temperature is dropping, airflow is stable, but the heating grid in sectors B and C is losing efficiency. We've started sealing off those wings to conserve power. That leaves us with the upper comms floor, the generator access, and the ration storage. If anything breaches those, if another infestation like the one in the early days of collapse spreads through the venting, we won't have many places left to fall back to. Maya's been quiet lately. I caught her reading from a water-damaged notebook she recovered during our first sweep of the eastern wing. I asked her what it was. She didn't answer, just folded the cover shut and walked off. Later, I caught a glimpse of it sitting near her bedroll. It was a journal, handwritten. On the inside of the cover, someone had scrolled the words. "We thought we were the last. Then the sky opened." That's all it said. What does that mean? Was it a hallucination, a metaphor, or something more literal? I don't know, not yet. But I'm starting to understand the deeper truth of these bunkers. They weren't meant to save everyone, that much is clear now. But maybe they weren't meant to save anyone at all. Maybe they were designed to observe us, see how long we'd last, what choices we'd make when pushed far enough, who would turn And who would remain human when the rules collapsed? And if that's true, then we're living inside someone else's experiment, still ongoing, still collecting data, still watching. I haven't heard from Kelmar's Rest since we left. The radio channel we used to contact them has been silent for weeks. No burst codes, no weather logs, no scheduled trade pings. I don't want to think about what that might mean. Tomorrow, we open the security wing carefully. If something's alive in there, we'll know. If it's something worse, then at least we'll know that too. Until then, this signal stays live. Stay awake out there. Keep your lights up. And if you've ever seen the sky open, tell me what it looked like. Kessler here. We breached the security wing this morning. The air was different in there, thicker somehow. Not in a chemical way, but like the pressure had shifted, as if the bunker itself was holding its breath for decades, and finally exhaled the moment the locks gave way. Daniel powered the override circuit through a bridge we built using copper from 2 disassembled heating panels. The door opened in stages, not all at once. First a mechanical clank, then a long hiss of pressurized seals releasing. When it finally slid open, it revealed a hallway wrapped in darkness and dust, perfectly preserved. No sign of movement, no immediate noise, just that eerie stillness like a tomb. We cleared the corridor in tight formation. Maya moved ahead, rifle raised, watching the corners. I followed, sweeping with the flood lamp. Daniel stayed behind, guarding the junction and monitoring our radio channel. We marked our path with reflective tape. The entire section had been untouched since lockdown. Layers of grime on the walls, frost on some pipes where climate control had frozen over and cracked the surface enamel. The first room we reached was labelled Operations Archive 03. Inside were stacks of physical records. Paper, microfilm, old-world drives, all packed in vacuum-sealed containers. A single terminal remained powered in the corner, drawing from its own battery. Maya checked the corners while I sat at the console. No login required, just a blinking cursor and a single line. "Welcome back," I recognized the name. Dr. Hayden Elner. The voice from the containment lab audio, the one who said, Subject 0 showed no sign of neural progression. The one who recommended euthanasia and then cut the recording. So he hadn't just been a lab tech, he had access to this wing. Maybe he worked in both areas, maybe he moved freely between the science sectors and the security wing. I ran a file index. Most of it was encrypted, but a few summaries remained. One in particular stood out, a logistics manifest from 15 years after the outbreak. Title, Sierra Protocol Redeployment Directive Tier 0 Only. The first line read, Per instruction from Command Authority, the observation cycle is complete. Tier 0 personnel are to be retrieved. Surface conditions deemed irrelevant. Subject viability remains statistically favorable. I read that line 5 times. Observation cycle retrieved. Surface conditions irrelevant. It confirmed everything I feared. The people in charge, whoever they were, whatever they became, never planned to re-emerge when the world healed. They planned to re-emerge when it was quiet enough. When those who remembered too much were dead, when resistance had rotted, when the infected had culled the population to manageable levels. The virus wasn't just a biological weapon, it was a long-term filter. I started searching the manifest for mentions of locations. Only 2 were named. The first was Site Helix, tagged as non-operational. The second was Bunker 2 Reclamation Anchor. The entry had no logs, no coordinates, just a redacted note. Access prohibited without temporal clearance. Temporal, that's not a word you see in logistics, not even in military planning. It's a word that suggests something deeper, maybe chronological studies, maybe long-range simulation, or something more disturbing. Time. Was Bunker 2 trying to measure time, track behavior over decades, or something even stranger? Something outside the framework of biology and more aligned with social engineering. We left the archive and moved deeper. The next room was sealed with a manual bar lock and 2 broken biometric panels. Someone had forcibly disabled it, cut the power lines, and scratched out the lens on both sides. It took us over an hour to pry it open. Inside we found a small office, barely more than a booth, a table, a chair, a single lamp still flickering, powered by an independent capacitor in the wall. The person sitting in the chair had been dead for years, mostly skeletal but still dressed. Government uniform, high clearance badge. He wasn't shackled, but he never tried to leave. A handwritten note was pinned to his chest. We didn't touch the body, just read the paper. They told me to wait, that someone would come for me when the cycle ended. They never did. If you're reading this, the door opened. Too late. No signature, no name, just the weight of what he left behind. I wonder if he ever realized the door wasn't locked from the outside. I found a cash drive in the drawer beside him, not connected to any terminal, just wrapped in old cloth and stashed with a spent flashlight cell and 3 ration bars, unopened. I haven't had the courage to plug it in yet. I will, but not tonight. We sealed the room on our way out, not out of fear, out of respect. These weren't just bunkers, they were cages for people who asked the wrong questions at the wrong time. Later, back in the comms room, I found Maya sitting beside the signal monitor, flipping through that same water-damaged journal. I asked her again what it meant. The phrase about the sky opening. This time she answered, "When I was posted near Amarillo, we saw lights one night over the dead zone. No engines, no drones, just silent arcs, moving together like they were following something we couldn't see. After that night, raiders started moving east. The dead started clustering differently, less random, more like they were being pulled. I asked her if she thought it was satellites, experimental weapons, maybe something left over from the orbital grid that failed during the last defense push. She shook her head. It wasn't that. It was waiting. Something was watching and we triggered it. I didn't ask more. Later I scanned the sky with the long-range receiver, just noise. Faint telemetry from defunct satellites. Solar flare interference. Nothing coherent. But at 3:17 this morning, I picked up a short pulse. A 4-note transmission almost identical to the one that first led me here. Except this one came from above. Same handshake, same burst, then silence. That shouldn't be possible. All military satellites were believed offline by year 20. The last ones burned up in orbital decay or were shut down during the blackout initiatives. So, where did the signal come from and who was it meant for? I recorded the burst, analyzed the structure. It matches the format used in old bunker-to-bunker transmissions, but with one major difference. The source tag doesn't say Bunker 2, it says RZV4. I've never seen that designation before, neither has Daniel. Maya hasn't said a word about it. I have a feeling she might know more than she's letting on. Or maybe she's just as lost as I am and doesn't want to guess out loud. Either way, the world just got wider again. We thought everything that mattered was underground. Now, I'm not sure we've been looking in the right direction. If you're listening, if you're out there, whether in a shelter, a ruined city, or watching from something higher than the clouds, hear this. We're not just surviving anymore, we're remembering. And those memories have weight. If this was a test, then the test never ended. If this was a filter, then maybe we're what made it through. I'll keep broadcasting until something answers back, or until I run out of power, or air, or time. But I'm not going quiet. Not yet. More tomorrow. This is Kessler in Bunker 12. We re-established contact with Kelmar's Rest today. For the first time in weeks, the signal came through. Staticky, faint, but unmistakable. The voice on the other end belonged to Elsie Marron, one of the tower watchers, and the closest thing we had to a quartermaster back home. She didn't waste time with pleasantries or questions, just relayed what she had to say, short and dry. Still standing, no breach. Raiders passed north, took livestock. 2 missing, that's all. Radio blackout was deliberate. Rebuilding panels. Copy, I replied. Copy, holding position, awaiting update. There was a pause. Maybe 4 seconds. Then she added, "We're still here, Adam. Don't waste it." Then the signal cut. That's all we got. Nothing about who the missing were. No details on how the raiders got close. No word on the outer defenses or what remained of the trade stocks. I sat in silence after that transmission, staring at the screen, the words still echoing in the back of my skull. "We're still here. Don't waste it." It was Maya who made the call first. She and Daniel were already gathering supplies before I even turned from the console. I didn't have to ask why. I knew they were going back. We didn't argue. There was no point. I'd have done the same if it were reversed. Daniel packed light, just his tool roll, a coil of synthetic cable and one of the emergency battery cells we hadn't fully drained. Maya took the bolt-action rifle, 2 pistols, her weather cloak, and 3 strips of dehydrated protein. They were gone within the hour, using the same route we'd come in by, the service shaft. We resealed it behind them, bent the frame inward just enough to make it hard to open again without tools. Before she left, Maya gave me the journal, the one with the line about the sky, just handed it over with no explanation, no comment. I asked her what I should do if they didn't return. She didn't answer, just turned and climbed into the shaft. I stood in the dock for a long time after that. I'm not afraid to be alone. That's not the issue. I've done it before. Nights in the outskirts, scavenging old substations and blown-out telecom towers. Days spent in a trench just outside of Trinity Rise, waiting for a raider caravan to pass. Silence isn't foreign to me, but the kind of silence that comes after trust leaves the room. That's different. Now it's just me and the bunker and whatever else is still down here. I started moving through the remaining unexplored sections after they left slowly, methodically. Sector F is still sealed behind multiple blast doors, and the power readings are unstable, but the monitoring panel outside shows fluctuating temperatures inside. Hotter than it should be. Something is generating heat down there, whether it's a male functioning grid line or something biological, I don't know. Not yet. I also went back to the cache drive I found in the security wing, the one wrapped in cloth and hidden near the body of the officer who'd been waiting for someone who never came. I set up an isolated terminal, made sure it wasn't connected to the main grid, and ran a dry boot. There was no virus, no encryption, just 3 video files, grainy surveillance style, each maybe 30 seconds long. The first showed a narrow hallway, probably in this bunker, judging by the wall markings. A figure in a lab coat moving toward the camera fast, then stopping suddenly and pressing their hands against the lens. Their mouth opened as if to speak, but no audio played. They looked behind them, panic etched across their face. Then the feed cut. The second was a static shot of a med bay, clean, sterile, lit by warm fluorescent overheads. A body lay on a table, female from what I could see. Wires ran from her skull to a panel off-screen. At first, nothing happened. Then her eyes opened. They didn't move, didn't blink, just stared directly into the camera, unbroken, as if she already knew where to look. The timestamp showed this footage was 24 years old. The third video was harder to make sense of. A series of flashing lights, an open blast door, shadowed movement in the far corner, a brief glimpse of a symbol on the wall, something circular with a line through it, surrounded by triangular warning signs. Then the lights went red. The camera feed collapsed into static. I don't know what I'm supposed to take from them, but I saved all 3 and stored them on a backup drive, disconnected from the terminal. Then I did something I hadn't done since I arrived. I walked to the comms console and changed frequencies. I swept the low bands first. Military, emergency, civilian, all dead. Then I tried the higher spectrum beyond the usual range. That's when I heard it again. A repeat burst, 4 tones matching the transmission from RZV4, but this time it was followed by a line of data compressed. I ran it through the decoder I'd built with Jerry back at Kelmar's Rest. It resolved into a single sentence: return sequence incomplete, awaiting uplink. That's all it said. What return sequence? Uplink to what? And more importantly, who was the message for? I tried responding, repeating the handshake. No reply, just static. Later, while reviewing the access logs from the data archive, I found something buried under old maintenance alerts. A communication report dated 2 years into the outbreak. The author wasn't a soldier or a scientist, just an analyst. He wrote, "The pattern isn't random. Major horde movements cluster around heat signatures and residual power grids. Behavior stabilizes near electromagnetic pulses. This isn't virus behavior, it's signal behavior." He concluded the report with a sentence underlined twice in red. They're not just drawn to life, they're drawn to systems. It reminded me of something Maya said once back when we were first wiring up the wind towers near the old comm shack. She said, "We don't know if we're calling for help or ringing the dinner bell." Now alone, I wonder which I've been doing this whole time. The lights just flickered once, then again. The main power grid held, but I'm switching to backup soon to conserve what we have. I don't know when Daniel and Maya will return. Could be days, could be never. Until then, I'll keep searching, I'll keep recording, and I'll keep this signal running as long as it lets me. If you hear this, if you're still human, still fighting, remember, survival wasn't what they planned for us. But maybe we can make it the reason they lose control of what they started. Stay alert and stay quiet. You're listening to Adam Kessler Bunker 12. It started with a sound I hadn't heard since childhood, one I'd only read about in scavenged manuals and overheard in old emergency drills, a low-pitched klaxon followed by 3 staccato bursts, not a breach alarm, not even an evacuation tone. This one was deeper, steadier, rhythmic, a warning that something powerful was waking up. The nuclear reactor was coming online. I didn't initiate the restart. Daniel must have tied the final sequence into the auxiliary grid before leaving. We'd been talking for weeks about rotating full systems back online, mostly to stabilize air scrubbers and finally power the hydroponics chambers again. I hadn't dared to attempt it solo, not without a fail-safe in place. But Daniel knew how to time the auto-boot. He must have scheduled the pulse just before he left, probably thinking we'd be back up to full functionality by the time he returned. He didn't account for what that power surge would wake up. The startup cascade lit the entire facility. Systems that had been dark for decades suddenly blinked to life. Panels buzzing, air vents pushing stale air through sealed ducts, and lights flickering on in sections we hadn't yet opened. Surveillance feeds came alive across 3 monitors in the comms hub. For the first time since I'd arrived, I saw this bunker not as a broken tomb, but as a functioning machine. And then came the screams. I was halfway down the hall to the central distribution hub when the Sector F alarms tripped. A second tone joined the first, this one sharper, angrier, coded for biological hazard breach. A wave of red emergency lights stuttered down the corridor. At the end of the hall, one of the thick security doors shuddered violently, not from a power surge, from something inside trying to get out. Then it did. The blast door cracked, and for just a second, I saw the first pair of eyes, clouded, sunken, inhuman. Not fast, not clever, but aware enough to move toward the light. I ran. I sealed the hall just behind me, yanking the manual override lever until it locked in place. A second, door slammed down 3 men behind me. Whatever had broken through wasn't slowed long. The sound that followed was unmistakable. Bare hands, or what was left of them, slamming flesh and bone against metal, dragging nails across steel, howling with hunger or habit. The infected were awake, not dozens, not yet, but at least a dozen burst through the previously sealed Sector F as the power grid reactivated. They had been trapped for years, maybe decades, suspended in some kind of cryo-holding or just too cold and too starved to move. The reactor's heat bled through the lower levels, and the power surge re-engaged environmental controls. That warmth must have been enough. I made it back to the comm station and rerouted all remaining door controls to my terminal. 4 sectors are now sealed. Sector F is cut off, but Sector D was connected through old maintenance crawlways I hadn't even considered vulnerable. 2 more alarms have gone off since I started this recording. Movement in the filtration shafts and another breach near the medical ward. I don't know how many got out before I rerouted power. I only know that at least one still has enough coordination to manipulate objects. One of the emergency panels near the med bay was opened, not forced, not broken, opened. And this is where the original idea starts to make too much sense. In one of the oldest data logs pre-outbreak, I found a short reference to reactive neurostimulation in controlled cadaver subjects. The language is dense, clinical, intentionally vague, but it mentions reactivation windows and environmental thresholds, suggesting that the infected aren't just random biological husks. They're programmed to wait, or at least their condition is such that they respond to external stimuli in patterns more sophisticated than previously assumed. When it's cold, they freeze. When it's dark, they stay still. But give them power, light, warmth, and they wake up. If someone designed this pathogen, art. Hey, embedded triggers. The implications are staggering. Every time survivors rebuild, every time we bring power back, heat up structures, turn on the lights, we may be reactivating buried threats without realizing it. Which brings me to something I haven't mentioned before. Something buried in the older system logs I've been reading when the rest of the grid is quiet. There's a recurring phrase, latency tier 7, urban implantations. In older files, it refers to sleeper cells of infected placed deliberately into high-density population zones after the initial outbreak was already known. Who would place infected? Who would store them inside cities? Unless the outbreak was never a failure of containment, it was part of the containment. I've seen just enough now to believe that the first wave wasn't the whole virus. It was the visible layer, the one meant to panic the population to drive governments underground. But beneath it, there were stages, timers, triggers. Bunkers like this one may have held not just survivors, but samples, versions of the infection in controlled environments, and now one of them is loose. As of now, I've counted 5 infected confirmed moving through the lower levels. Another 3 are in maintenance shafts above Sector D. 2 more appeared briefly on the surveillance grid, then vanished. I am locking down the upper comms hub. I've welded 2 pressure doors and rigged the central access with an improvised alarm. A coil of cutlery and wire stretched across the corridor. It's primitive, but it'll give me a moment's warning. The reactor is stable but running hot. I can't shut it down without manually disabling the coolant loop, which I don't have access to without descending into the generator core again. And I won't, not with movement down there. The infected don't behave like they did on the surface. They're quieter, slower, more deliberate. It's like they're not hunting yet, just feeling their way through the space, remembering old instincts, testing walls, waiting. I've studied this kind of behavior before in survivor journals. We always assumed starvation reduced their activity, that if cut off from heat and fresh hosts, the infected simply fell dormant. But now I'm beginning to think they're more like ticks, able to wait years, buried in cold rock and ruin until just the right conditions let them stir again. What's worse is that the surveillance feed from the reactor control hallway, the one nearest the breakout, shows signs of tampering, not sabotage. Something stranger. The camera feed cuts every 37 seconds. Exactly. as if something is pulsing through the system and disabling the lens. No damage, just interruption. What kind of biological process could cause that, or is it technological? The logs never speak directly of hybridization, no references to cybernetic implants or neural enhancements. But there's a phrase I keep seeing in connection with Bunker 2. Biologically sustained logic cause. I don't know what that means yet, but it suggests something far more terrifying than reanimated corpses. It suggests intention. If there is something alive in this facility that remembers being human, something that can manipulate, control, or redirect electrical systems, then we're dealing with more than just infection. We're dealing with something that may still be evolving. Tomorrow I'll try to isolate the heat signatures again and track the infected movement between ducts. I'm down to 1 functioning motion sensor and 3 pressure plates, and I'll be placing all of them tonight near the eastern corridor. If I don't wake up in time, the recording will continue until the battery runs out. But I don't plan on dying in this bunker, not until I understand why it was built, not until I find out what escaped. I survived the night. Barely. They got closer than I expected, closer than they should have been able to, given how I had sealed off the corridor. I don't know if one of the vents I overlooked was already compromised, or if something else pried it open during the power surge, but at 3:43 the eastern corridor motion plate triggered. The alarm rang through my earpiece. I bolted up from the console, still half asleep, and hit the lock-on sequence on the terminal. Sector D sealed the auxiliary maintenance hallway. Sector H did not. That's where one of them got through. I heard it before I saw it. Slow dragging steps across the grating. A faint, almost rhythmic scrape of skin or bone against metal. Not loud, not panicked, just steady, like it had all the time in the world. I backed away from the main access hallway and waited by the second fallback door. I'd rigged it with a fail-safe, an old hydraulic lift repurposed to slam shut if the door was forced. My hand hovered over the trigger for nearly 5 minutes, then the steps stopped. No sound, no breathing, no noise at all. I waited longer, still as stone. Eventually, I heard the metal shift, not from footsteps, from pressure. Wait. It was trying to test the door or lean into it. I didn't move, didn't speak, just listened. Then, without warning, the sound of scratching, long, dragging fingernails or maybe claws across the seam between door and floor. Not an attempt to break through, just tracing it like it recognized the shape of the passage, the material. Then it was gone. The motion plate never reset. It's possible it destroyed the sensor or passed it without triggering it again. I don't know. But when I checked the pressure seal logs, there was a spike in ambient temperature near the vent system above Sector H. A brief flare, then nothing. I'm starting to think these things are more sensitive to power lines than we ever realized. The warmth, the electricity, it draws them like insects to heat. Maybe not instinctively, maybe not because of hunger, but because it's familiar. Because once, long ago, they lived in buildings like this, under lights like these, following systems like these. If this infection preserves even fragments of memory, if it lets the brain hold on to spatial recognition, light association, or routine patterns, it would explain the behavior I'm seeing. That changes everything, because that means they aren't just monsters, they're remnants, echoes of who they were. Now, imagine how that's affected after years trapped in darkness, silence, cold. What would that do to your perception of space, time, identity? What would waking up feel like? Today I began tracking one of the infected that I'd seen on camera the previous day. This one's different. Not faster, not stronger, but it moves with purpose. It has a limp left leg, dragging slightly, but doesn't stumble like the others. It never hesitates at corridor intersections. It doesn't react to sound or light the same way. It doesn't flinch. It doesn't wander. It moves door to door, hatch to hatch, as if it's searching for something. I've labeled it Walker 17 on the surveillance grid. So far, it's passed through 3 sectors without engaging with other infected. It doesn't seem interested in them. It passed one in the old cafeteria. A half-rotted thing slumped in the corner and didn't even turn its head. Instead, it walked directly to the old comms relay room, tried the door, found it locked, stayed for over a minute, motionless, facing the panel. Then it turned and walked back the way it came. If I didn't know better, I'd think it was looking for me. I've locked myself in the comms chamber permanently now, moved the rations and water into the room, reinforced the outer hatch with a triple bar from the decommissioned coolant grid, and sealed the upper duct with welded conduit pipe. There's still airflow, but nothing wider than a coin could get through now. Still, I feel ched. Not constantly, but occasionally when the signal quiets and the ventilation slows, I can feel the space outside the wall shift, like something is waiting just outside the ring of warmth and noise, testing it, smelling it, remembering it. I've been listening back through Marcel's original transmissions. I missed something the first time, not in the message itself, but in the background. A hum, barely audible. I filtered it out, boosted the signal, ran a spectrum scan. It's not interference, it's a second voice. Low, distorted, likely not human, at least not anymore. The cadence is slow, drawn out, almost like speech, but broken across intervals. I ran it against the limited phonetic database I salvaged from the old NSA satellite logs. Best match, encrypted burst pattern, old world, military comms compression, which means, if I'm reading this right, Marcel wasn't just calling for help. She was intercepted. There was someone else on the line, someone or something that waited for her messages to go out and responded beneath the static. If this infection has a signal component, if it evolved alongside dormant frequencies, low-band communication, or electromagnetic fields, we've misunderstood it from the beginning. And if we misunderstood it, that means we've also been feeding it. Every flare tower we rebuilt, every powered bunker we reactivated, every transmission we sent, they weren't just signs of life. They were invitations. I've shut down the external beacons. Only this transmitter remains active. I'll keep it on for as long as I can, but only because I believe the truth still matters. Even if I don't make it out, even if the last face I see is Walker 17 staring through the crack in the reinforced window, remembering a job it once had, or a door it once opened, or a face it once knew. Even then I'll keep recording. The truth is down here, and maybe, just maybe, it doesn't want to stay buried anymore. This is Kessler transmitting from the bones of a dead world. I didn't sleep last night, couldn't. I stayed in the broadcast room, sitting cross-legged beneath the old console with the headset laid across my knees, listening to the hum of the circuits and the faint clatter of the ventilation fans. I kept thinking about Walker 17. The way it moved, not just in a straight line, but with intent, like it knew what part of the bunker mattered, like it remembered what it meant to search. Even now, the security feed outside the sealed comms corridor flickers occasionally, showing the shadow of something that moves with the rhythm of a man who once had keys to every door. This morning, the main console lit up with an internal alert, Sector F. Again, that entire section is sealed now, or should be. But according to the system, access logs were triggered, not physical doors, data terminals. One of the secured consoles in F1 was accessed for 12 seconds. Only one file opened. The system didn't log what it was. I didn't authorize the access. I'm the only person in the facility with the current root key, and I haven't left this room in 2 days. Yet someone or something with system permissions high enough to override my lockdown entered a command. That shouldn't be possible. Not unless there's another user still alive, or unless the system recognizes one of the infected as a former personnel ID. Biometrics, facial structure, neural print, something lingering just enough to grant access. That would explain what I saw in the earlier surveillance clip. The infected subject approaching the panel, not smashing it, not ignoring it, but facing it, standing close like it remembered how to engage. I don't want to speculate, but I can't avoid the possibility anymore. Some of these infected, especially the ones stored here in these deep facilities, they weren't just victims, they were subjects, and some of them may have been former staff, which would explain why the door to the medical arch was opened this afternoon without tripping the breach sensors. When I reached the feed, it was already swinging shut again. The lights inside blinked once, then cut. I'm sealing that wing permanently. I've spent most of the day reading back through the old terminal logs from Sector C. One set of notes dated early into the outbreak comes from a technician named Madsen. No title, just a login ID and a string of observational entries about the experiments conducted inside the containment vaults. Madsen wasn't high level, not like Marcel. He was a runner, a low-clearance tech responsible for refueling battery cores and scrubbing interface filters. He wasn't supposed to see the test subjects, but according to his entries, he did, accidentally. He describes what he saw in dry clinical terms. He tried to remain detached, but there's fear between the lines. Subject Solo 1 exhibited limbic response to light variance, no movement for 6 hours. Then as I changed the panel lighting to white band spectrum, subject turned head, tracked motion for 22 seconds, ceased only after I cut power. Sensors indicated no external command. This wasn't reflex, it was recognition. Another log entry later was ordered not to report incident. Told to erase camera feed, compliance logged, but subject 011 now moves independently during night cycle. I believe it's anticipating the maintenance schedule. There's a final note. Subject 011 was once a security officer. Badge number confirmed. I think it remembers where its locker was, requesting reassignment. The entry ends there. No confirmation if Madsen was moved. No word on whether subject 011 was destroyed or transferred, but I checked the personnel logs. There was a security officer by that badge number, assigned to Bunker 12. Full name, Harold Vinch. Presumed dead in the 3rd month of containment after exposure to infected blood during a riot. No burial listed, no commit, just removed from active duty. If he was infected and not destroyed and left here for study, then Walker 17 may not just look like a man who belonged in this place. He was that man. And if even fragments of his cognitive function remain, pattern recognition, movement, memory, access behavior, then we're dealing with something far more dangerous than reanimated tissue. We're dealing with conditioned response, embedded in a body, stripped of everything but purpose. That would make the virus more than just a biological weapon. It would make it a repurposing tool, one that turns human experience into a shell of obedience. I started asking questions too late. I thought I came here to discover what we lost. Now I'm starting to believe I came here to understand what we unleashed. And still, the deeper systems of this place hold more secrets. I finally cracked the secondary data vault, an encrypted archive stored deep in the reactor's control interface. I'd seen fragments of it before, but without Marcel's clearance and the cache drive from the officer in the security wing, I couldn't make sense of the syntax. Now I have access to 2 files I wish I'd never opened. The first is a schematic, not of this bunker, of a satellite grid tagged under Operation Enclave. 26 nodes in low Earth orbit, all marked inactive, all connected by a system labeled Protocol Solace. One note in red: do not reactivate unless confirmation of extinction level event has been verified. Direct AI interface prohibited without Tier 0 override. I cross-referenced Protocol Solace with everything I could find. Nothing in the public or private databases, but the phrase shows up once more, buried in an encrypted document from Bunker 2. Solus Grid authorized to engage memory trigger phase if surface conditions stabilize, signal is irreversible, Memory trigger phase, that sounds a lot like a failsafe, or maybe a reset switch, a command to push the world back under the surface if things ever start to recover. What if the orbital network wasn't about defense or observation? What if it was about containment through regression? Ensure humanity never progresses far enough to uncover what really happened, and if it does, reset it quietly, systematically. That's what I'm beginning to believe. This virus was never the end game, just the cover story. The second file was a log text only. It begins with a simple statement. The first subjects were volunteers. The file goes on to describe early experimentation on what it called voluntary exposure models. Test subjects injected with modified pathogens meant to preserve brain function while allowing the immune system to degrade non-critical processes. It was meant to keep soldiers functional after trauma, to make them resilient, unstoppable, fearless. The original test environment, Bunker 12, it happened here. The infection didn't leak from an asteroid. It walked willingly into a room, held out its arm, and waited for someone in a white coat to press the plunger. Then it was catalogued, contained, and studied until someone realized what it could do and someone else realized what it shouldn't be allowed to stop doing. If what I'm reading is real, then the virus isn't alien, it's not divine punishment or evolutionary correction. It's ours built, refined, weaponized, and then abandoned when it became too effective. Now it waits in corridors, in graves, in old bunkers and broken towers and sealed hatches and rotting cities. It waits for light, for warmth, for us. I'm going to try to reach Maya and Daniel tomorrow. It's been 5 days. No signal.
I haven't dared broadcast on our private channel. Too risky now that I know someone or something may still be monitoring old frequencies, but I've rigged a passive ping. If they're within scanning zone, they'll hear the return tone. I hope they're alive because I'm not sure I can hold this place much longer. There's movement again in the access corridor, and I'm starting to think Walker 17 remembers how to get in more soon. Kessler here. The ping went out at dawn. A short, silent burst, low-frequency carrier tone, embedded with a fragment of our original call sign hash. It was the kind of signal Maya and Daniel would recognize if they were even half functional on the other end. No voice, no beacon, just a presence. A whisper in the radio dark. It's been 10 hours. Nothing. I'll send another tonight, just once. No more than that. I don't want to call attention to this place any more than I already have. Meanwhile, I've been trying to make sense of the satellite schematic from the Enclave grid. I printed the full layout onto salvaged transparency stock and pinned it to the comms board. 26 nodes arranged in a staggered polar formation, all dormant, all marked inactive except one, node 19. Its entry reads PWR LVL Shed Pulse Delhi 26 and 30. I had to double-check the last line. DLY 2630 delay 2630 days, just over 7 years. I ran a date count backwards from today. 7 years ago, almost to the week, the last of the East Coast safe zones were overrun. The last of the major urban arcs went silent. That's when we stopped receiving weather forecasts, satellite images, positional relays. That's when we stopped seeing the sky for anything but fire and ash. So, what does Node 19's pulse mean? Was that the final shutdown or the start of something else? I think these satellites were built not to observe us, but to record something, store it, archive it, maybe even send it. There are notations, Aggie.
Across the schematic referencing a system called Delta Return tied to several bunker relay arrays. Some of the words are smudged from time, but I made out all Tier 0 sites required to initiate uplink cascade if population index below threshold 4. I searched for threshold 4 in the medical logs, found it only once in a psychological debrief document. If humanity's remaining cognitive retention is measured below threshold 4, memory inheritance deemed irreoverable, strategic value of species continuation negated. That sounds like a test, a final metric. If we as a species fall below some arbitrary point, some score of memory, intelligence, cohesion, then whoever built this system decided we weren't worth continuing. And so maybe then the satellites activate, not to save, but to report back. To who? That part's blank. But a line in the earliest Enclave documents mentions a phrase I haven't seen anywhere else. Project oversight reserved for external review authority, no department name, no agency, no logo, just that. I've begun to wonder if these bunkers, our whole underground system, weren't about protection. Not really. They were about observation, human behavior under collapse, social decay, moral choices under pressure, population stress, ethical breakdown, tribalism. A series of case studies sealed in steel and stone. Maybe we were never meant to survive, just to perform. That would explain the structure of this place. So many corridors designed for observation, not escape. So many rooms with one entrance and no exit. So many security systems hard-coded, not to let people out but to keep something in. And now I have confirmation that those systems are starting to fail. The temperature in the lower reactor corridor has risen by 3 degrees, not much on its own, but combined with the humidity spike and the corrosion sensor activation, it suggests movement. Organic decay against metal. Maybe breathing. Maybe heat from slow, deliberate steps. Walker 17 hasn't appeared on camera in over 12 hours, but someone triggered the sensor plate in the Sector B stairwell, a path that leads directly toward the upper levels, a path that ends just one floor beneath this room. I haven't fired a weapon in weeks. Ammunition is low, but I still have 3 flares and 2 incendiary rods left from the early supply crates. I've rigged the upper stairs with tripwires tied to the emergency sprinkler system. If something crosses the line, it'll trigger the spray and hopefully blind it long enough for me to reach the fallback. I don't know if it will work, but it's better than waiting in silence. Earlier, I returned to the archive room where I found Marcel's final recordings. I'd left the last file unopened. I don't know why. Maybe I wasn't ready. Maybe I feared what it would mean to hear the voice of someone who died trying to do the same thing I'm doing now. Broadcasting into the void, waiting for something to change. The file was audio only. Her voice was quieter than before. Hollow. You could hear the static of the failing generator behind her. If you're hearing this, it means the power came back. And if the power came back, they're waking up. Don't make the mistake I made. Don't try to save this place. Don't try to rebuild it. Just take what you can and run. Go to the surface. Forget the plans. Forget the maps. There's nothing left down here but echoes. Then she paused. There was a long silence. I thought the recording ended, but then she said something else, barely above a whisper. He still walks the corridor. He remembers my name. She didn't say who, but I don't need her to. I know now that Walker 17 didn't just survive here. He stayed here, watching her, waiting, maybe protecting her, or maybe studying her the way someone once studied him. The door sensor just
Triggered. Something's on the other side. I won't speak again tonight. If you hear silence after this, know that I tried. Know that I saw the end, not as a roar, but as the quiet unraveling of truths too long buried. And if you're still alive, if your bunker still holds, if your lights still flicker, ask yourself, who is watching you, and why haven't they come to help? I'll speak again if I can. Until then, listen carefully, because sometimes it's not the infected you need to fear. It's the ones who still remember who they were, still here, still transmitting, still alive for now. Whoever or whatever was behind the steel door last night gave up, or it decided to wait. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back to the comms booth wall, flare in one hand, the manual shut-off lever within arm's reach. I listened for footsteps, for breath, for any shift in pressure. But after that final metallic thud, there was only stillness. By sunrise, the sensor grid showed no movement in the stairwell. I did a silent manual sweep of the hallway. Boots off, knife drawn, every footstep placed like a needle between tiles. The door was still sealed, scratched, yes, marked with a smear of something too dark to be fresh, but unreached. Walker 17 had vanished again. That left me with no choice. I had to take control of the rest of the facility while I still could. The first thing I did was restore minimal power to the Sector B access panels.
Since the reactor came online, several emergency locks had defaulted to passive failsafe status. That's a design feature. When systems can't verify interior security, they loosen restrictions to allow for evacuation. But in this case, it meant 3 doors I hadn't previously opened were now accessible. I prioritized the main records vault first. The entrance was sealed with a twisted bundle of cables and thermal tape. Someone had tried to reinforce it long before.
The power died. Probably Marcel. The keypad was unresponsive, but with grid current stabilized, I managed to route power through a wall-mounted maintenance box. Took 15 minutes. 1 burnt fuse and a copper shard. I yanked from the hydroponics console. Inside the records room, the temperature was cooler than the rest of the bunker. The air smelled like damp plastic and old ozone. Filing racks lined the walls, all of them locked behind transparent shielding. But most of the terminal stations were dead, all except one, a black console, clearly not standard military issue. No logo, no ID, a civilian-grade data interface that had been wired clumsily into the wall junction. I don't know who put it there, but judging by the improvised shielding and cracked casing, it had been used in a hurry. The system booted on contact. No password, just a prompt. Voice verification accepted. Continue. Yes or no. The voice print wasn't mine. Someone else had authorized it recently, well after the collapse. The log said as much. I pressed yes. And there it was, the last complete data archive of Bunker 12. A mirrored copy of everything the AI systems had recorded since the reactor was installed. Hundreds of logs, communications, internal memos, surveillance backups. But what caught my eye wasn't the data, it was the map. A full schematic of the facility pre-lockdown. And right there, flashing in amber, was a sector I had never seen before. Sector K, no label, no designation, no access path from the known corridors, but clearly drawn, buried at the deepest level, below the hydroponics, below the generator loop, almost parallel with the cryo-sed vault. It had no physical access points listed on the main schematic, but it had one entry route, a ladder shaft half collapsed, marked Service Ventilation Drop Engineering Class 4, and it had unlocked with the rest when the reactor came online. I printed the overlay and pinned it to my vest. I wasn't going blind this time, but before I descended that far, I had to deal with the remaining infected. No matter how much data I recovered, it wouldn't matter if I got torn apart by something crawling through a forgotten duct. I reactivated the internal sensors across sectors E and F. The new power from the reactor allowed for full thermal imaging, at least in short bursts. I ran 1 sweep, 2, 4 infected, 2 in the medical bay, 1 in the old laundry substation, and 1 unaccounted for, possibly Walker 17, or possibly a different host. I made a plan. 1 by 1 I'd isolate and burn them. The medical bay was first. I locked the hallway behind me, threw a sodium flare into the door vent, and waited 30 seconds for heat shock to disorient anything inside. Then I opened the door and stepped in. The 2 infected inside had already collapsed. 1 was tangled in old tubing near the surgical gurney. The other had partially fused to the floor, melted into the blood-dried tiles where years of decomposition and cold had rooted it like a plant. Neither moved. I smashed both skulls with a reinforced pipe I'd pulled from the secondary conduit shaft. No bullets, no noise. I've learned that silence is survival. The third one down in the laundry hall was faster, smarter. It had crawled into a fuse locker, hiding. I only found it by the heat trail it left on the concrete. When I opened the panel, it lunged. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I let it fall onto the ground, disoriented, and set its torso ablaze with a magnesium strike flare. It flailed for longer than I liked. I dumped what was left into the waste shaft and sealed it. 3 down, the 4th. I still haven't found it, and now I'm starting to think I never will, because maybe it's not wandering. Maybe it's waiting, watching. Walker 17 hasn't shown since the night before, but I've seen and flickers of movement on the old camera loops. ghosts of shapes, shadows that aren't coded by the software because they don't pass long enough to register as a threat. And I don't trust the software anymore. I don't think the system was meant to track something that remembers it's being watched, but that's for later because now I have to reach Sector K. I found the ladder shaft half concealed behind a false panel in the base of the generator maintenance crawl space. It's rusted through in places. Some of the rungs are gone completely, but the drop isn't fatal. 30 me, maybe less. I've already tied together enough cable and support hooks to lower myself. Tomorrow morning I'll make the descent. I'll take a single light, 2 flares, my last sidearm, and I'll find out what's down there, because this place wasn't built for survival. It was built to preserve something they buried even deeper than the reactor, even deeper than the infected. Maybe it's the truth, maybe it's the origin, or maybe it's just the last lie they told themselves before locking the door behind them. Either way, I'm going in. If this is my last recording, let it stand for something, not just fear, not just revelation, but proof that we questioned, that we looked, that even when the doors were welded shut and the lights flickered out, someone refused to forget the world we came from and what it was turned into. Kessler here, broadcasting now from the bottom of the world. I made the descent. The shaft down to Sector K wasn't a direct drop, but it might as well have been. The metal framework was pitted and brittle. Some rungs broken clean off, others fused to the wall by time and oxidation. The first few meters were manageable. Slow, deliberate handholds, each movement tested before weight committed. But 20 millimeters down, where the air thickened and the walls narrowed, the shaft grew jagged. The steel became uneven, folded inward by some long past impact or tectonic shift. I had to sidestep into a crevice to regain footing, and for a moment I considered turning back. But when I reached the ledge, where the wall curved outward and the darkness took on a different texture, I felt it. Not heat, not cold, just emptiness, the way deep caverns breathe when you first step inside. The light from my headlamp didn't penetrate far. It spilled across metal plating, dusty rail lines and broken wall panels before being swallowed whole. But even in that faint glow, I could tell Sector K wasn't part of the original design. The materials didn't match the rest of Bunker 12. The paneling was darker, smoother, not corroded, but aged in a different way. Less decay, more neglect. When I dropped the last few feet and landed, the echo was sharp, immediate. The floor beneath me wasn't steel, it was something composite, thicker, denser than I expected. It vibrated underfoot with a low hum, almost imperceptible unless you stood still long enough. Something here was still powered. I took one step forward and stopped. There was writing on the wall, not painted, not etched, projected. A thin line of text glowing faintly against the black surface. Review, Node 4. User presence acknowledged. No one ever told us about Sector K. It wasn't on any printed schematic. Wasn't in any of the debrief logs. Marcel's records ended at the lower maintenance levels. Evan's experiments never mentioned a space this deep, which meant either it was built in secret or it wasn't part of Bunker 12 at all. The first chamber I entered was empty, circular, low ceiling. A ring of recessed screens, most dark, a few blinking softly with green code that meant nothing to me. In the center was a pedestal, smooth, rounded, and on top a biometric scanner. I didn't approach, not yet. Instead, I followed the outer edge of the room, checking for anything physical. Data ports, exit points, emergency kits, anything that would confirm this was meant for human access. There were none. No handrails, no ladders, no oxygen tanks, no chairs, no desks. Just the pedestal and the screens and the text that now read, waiting for input. I stood there for almost an hour watching, listening. Nothing changed. Eventually I placed my hand on the scanner. It didn't reject me. didn't even require ID. It simply accepted. The lights flickered. A low tone filled the air, long, flat, almost like a breath. And then the screens came alive. Not with camera feeds, not with maps, but faces. Rows of them, hundreds, maybe thousands. Some smiling, some crying, some frozen mid-spec. Men, women, children, different ages, ethnicities, uniforms. Most were tagged with names, others simply listed as subject unknown. These weren't surveillance photos, they were memories. Snapshots pulled from somewhere, either a massive database or something more intimate. Some looked like they'd been taken from body cams, others from phone footage, drone feeds, or personal archives. A few were clearly extracted from helmet recordings, complete with distortion effects and status readouts in the corners. The date stamps ranged from 2 years before the outbreak to over 20 years after. These were real people, tracked, archived, categorized, and now sealed in a vault beneath a bunker. No one was supposed to survive. I searched for a pattern. Many were tagged with labels: Tier 0 candidate, behavioral flag observation, cognitive drift failed, Delta index pending purge. I found one labeled Marcel, no last name, just her image, staring directly into the lens, eyes wide. There was no outcome tag, just a question mark. Then I found another me. It was from 6 years ago, a still image from the wind turbine outside Kelmar's Rest. I was mid-stride carrying a rusted converter coil with Jerry, my
mentor. He was smiling. I was not. I don't remember the moment, but the camera that captured it must have been somewhere we never noticed. And the tag beneath my image, Anomaly Class B self-directed observation. I backed away from the screen. This isn't just a record room, it's an evaluation chamber, a place to monitor and sort human behavior. Who resists, who conforms, who rebuilds, who transmits? Who keeps the lights on? A bunker beneath the bunker. And the worst part, it's still active. That hum in the floor, it isn't ambient. It's the processor, a massive core embedded beneath the pedestal running an algorithm I don't understand. Maybe something no one ever was supposed to. I found a console port beneath one of the screens,
plugged in my backup drive, pulled 3 minutes of data before the system kicked me off. I haven't decoded it yet, but the file headers included something that chilled me more than the faces. External uplink pending, last node active, RZV4, the same signal I intercepted from orbit. So this room, this system, has contact with the satellite grid. I shut everything down, disconnected. I don't know if that stopped anything. Maybe it was all automated. Maybe someone or something already knows I was here. The walk back up the shaft felt longer than the descent. I moved slowly, one hand always gripping the cable line, the other holding the flare. I kept thinking I'd hear footsteps behind me, but there was only the echo of my own breath. Back in the upper corridors, things were quiet, too quiet. The pressure sensor near the comms room hadn't been tripped. No sign of Walker 17, no other infected, no alerts, just the cold, humming bones of a place that once believed it could contain the end of the world. I don't think it was ever meant to contain anything. I think it was meant to judge who we were, what we did, and whether we deserved a signal to be sent back to the sky. That question still hangs in the air, because now I wonder, was the virus a failure, or was it the test? The system knows I'm here now, and I still don't know what that means. I'll analyze the files I pulled tomorrow, see if there's more to uncover. But for tonight, I'm keeping the door sealed, the lights low, and the broadcast running. Because maybe someone else needs to know what we were turned into. Maybe someone else is asking the same questions. And if we ever meet above or below, I want them to hear one thing clearly. We were not silent. We remembered. Kessler live. New signal, new knowledge. This morning, while reviewing the partial data logs I recovered from Sector K, I found something buried beneath one of the behavioral analysis indexes. Not a surveillance clip, not a personnel file, a policy document, not military either, something older. Civilian administrative tone, a scan of a hard copy with red ink corrections in the margins and 3 approval stamps, each marked with the seal of what used to be the United States government. But the agency wasn't one I recognized. Office of Continental Continuity Directive Packet 0, Form 4A, Final Border Act and North Hemisphere Stabilization Framework. Date, March the 3rd, 2073. Classification, Tier 0, Presidential Access Only. That alone made me sit back in the chair. I was born 25 years ago in a collapsed world, in a metal shelter under 3 feet of dirt, lit by solar strips, kept alive by salvaged tech and ration tablets that expired before I ever tasted them. I grew up hearing stories, fragments passed from survivors who remembered cities, food that grew in the open and skies without ash. But they never talked about what really happened during the final collapse. Not because they didn't want to, because they didn't know, because no one who actually knew ever came back to tell us. But this document, this directive, it speaks with the voice of a government that wasn't falling apart. It was planning for its own disappearance. It opens with a statement: the disintegration of national identity is inevitable in the face of global biological instability. Therefore, strategic retreat to core governance zones is essential. The United States will cease recognition of all current international borders effective April 1st, 2073. All previous diplomatic, economic, and military agreements with Canada, Mexico, and allied hemispheric states are nullified. The new national perimeter shall extend no further south than the Darien Gap. No territorial concessions beyond this line will be recognized or defended. No further south than Colombia. That was the last line. I don't know how much of the population even realized this was enacted. Most people think the world ended with a virus and a bang. But this policy confirms that the government withdrew before the collapse. It didn't just die, it retreated. The directive continues outlining how resources were to be consolidated under one sovereign authority. There would be no states, no provinces, no sovereign tribal territories, just zones. Blue zones, strategic urban complexes, green zones, agricultural and hydro-urban regions, and red zones, everything else. Red zones were to be sterilized and denied once the bunkers were fully operational. Then comes the part that hit hardest. The civilian population remaining in red zones is hereby designated as non-reoverable. Civilian trust and stability cannot be maintained at current population levels without mass resource depletion. Therefore, all humanitarian supply missions to red zones will cease immediately following final network isolation. No recovery, no evacuation, no plan to save the people who weren't inside the perimeter. My parents were red zone. Everyone I've ever known was red zone. And not because we were violent or infected or unfit to live, just because we weren't inside the walls when the lights went off. Reading that and really understanding it was like swallowing rust. All those years we hoped someone would find us, that one day a plane or a drone would descend and announce that help had returned, that order had been restored, that someone out there remembered who we were. It was never coming because they shut the gates before the world even burned. And they never planned to open them again. I sat with that document open on the terminal for over an hour, just staring at the date, wondering who signed it, wondering if they still lived long enough to see what it became. Then the signal came. Short, jagged, but familiar. I scrambled to the comms console, switched frequencies, rerouted the receiver into the analog band, and held my breath. A burst of static, then a voice, Maya. Her voice cracked across the frequency like a match in the dark. Adam still standing. Daniel's with me, repeat. Daniel's here. Kelmar's rest is intact. Took hits, we're recovering. Comm tower got fried. Raiders bypassed outer perimeter. Minor losses. Fuel line is wrecked. We're using battery backup. Can't transmit long. You copy? I didn't even wait for the auto timestamp to confirm. I keyed the mic and answered. I'm here. I'm still here. Bunker is active. Confirm power grid is stable. Hostiles were contained. New sector accessed. I have information. You're not going to believe what I found. There was a pause. Then Maya came back calmer now. Copy that. We'll get back to you in 48 hours. Tower uplink is patchy. Sending burst packet with coordinates and relay data. Don't move. Don't shut down. You hear me, Adam? Stay locked in. Then silence again, but it was enough. They're alive. My people are alive. I wanted to sit down, but the adrenaline had me pacing the room like a trapped animal. There's still a long road between now and reuniting. But just knowing someone else is still holding the line, that they heard me, that I'm not just broadcasting into the bones of a dead world, it changes everything. I replayed her message 5 times, listened to Daniel's voice in the background giving status on the turbines, normal, familiar, and painfully human, like the world we should have had. I don't know what they'll make of what I found here. About the Tier 0 policies, about the vault full of surveillance footage and categorized lives, about the memory thresholds and orbital dead switches. But they need to know, we all do, because this world didn't just break, it was broken on purpose. Now I've got 48 hours before they return. 48 hours to learn everything I can to prep the files for extraction, to trace the uplink commands and see where they lead. If we can get this data back to Kelmar's rest, if we can decode the satellite schedules, and maybe even find a way to jam the uplink protocol, then maybe, just maybe, we can stop whatever happens next. Because it's coming. I feel it in the walls, in the power grid, in the systems that keep whispering across dead networks, even when no one's supposed to be listening. And worst of all, I think someone is still listening. Something in the system changed after I downloaded the directive. A new prompt appeared on the comms terminal. It flashed once, then stayed.
Uplink received. Thank you, Observer Kessler. Observer, not survivor, not citizen. Observer, how long have I been watched? What else have I triggered just by learning? I'm locking down the transmitter tonight. Just the analog channel stays live. If I disappear, if you find this bunker after I'm gone, know that this wasn't an accident. This was a choice by them. And now, maybe by us too. We're not just survivors anymore. We're witnesses still here, still transmitting, and didn't sleep. Not because of a sound or movement. Last night was still, not even the ventilation fans hummed. The silence wasn't peaceful, though. It was held like the bunker itself had drawn in a breath and refused to let it go. I stayed at the console, eyes fixed on the prompt that hadn't stopped glowing since it appeared. Uplink received. Thank you, Observer Kessler. It hasn't changed. I didn't respond. I don't even know how. There's no input field, no command line, just that same message, steady and waiting like it's expecting me to acknowledge what I've become, what they say I've become, an observer. I've spent most of the last 12 hours pulling whatever I can from the mirrored archive. Now that the terminal recognizes me as a valid user, it's feeding data without resistance, no passwords, no clearance gates. The system just opens like a vault that finally recognizes its inheritor. It terrifies me more than any locked door ever did. One of the folders was labeled Post-Dissolution Governance Briefings and Simulations.
The language is technical, clinical, structured more like corporate transition documents than anything military. Some of it is over my head, statistical modeling, predictive algorithms, behavioral psychology matrices, but the thrust is clear. They knew the world was going to collapse, and they gamed it out. The file begins with a timestamp from the final quarter of 2071. The outbreak had not yet begun. The global economy was still intact, though strained, but within the simulation logs were entries like North Hemisphere collapse timeline 34.56 months. Red zone civilian mortality rate projected 89.6%, 6% within first 2 years. Blue zone survivor retention strategy, information restriction plus narrative seeding, public explanation for disaster, ELA narrative preferable origin, flexible climate impact event, cross-species mutation and so on, Elliot's extinction level event. They didn't just make up the asteroid story because it was convenient. They ran simulations of which lie would be easiest to sustain under collapsing infrastructure, which narrative people would most easily accept and, more importantly, not question. The virus in this version was not the disaster. It was the tool. It had other names in earlier documentation: Esism, Theta compound, behavioral modification vector, or BMV, all wrapped in acronyms that sounded like research projects but read like weapons testing programs. And buried in the core logic were terms I'm starting to understand far too well: compliance gradients, cognitive stripping, preservation of mechanical routines post-infection. The virus was never meant to kill us outright. It was meant to reduce us, to simplify what made us unpredictable, to burn away the memories, the choices, the defiance, until only reflex remained, until we became predictable, manageable, useful. And the worst part, I found documentation showing that multiple early-stage vaccines were developed and shelved. One trial conducted in Alaska showed 78% effectiveness. Another, out of a subterranean research annex beneath what used to be the Rockies, showed even better results but was abruptly terminated. The reason listed strategic value of universal immunity deemed lower than observed social consolidation following outbreak onset. Let me say that again clearly. They let the virus spread because it made people easier to control. Because in the face of monsters, we stopped asking questions. And once we stopped asking, the real work could begin. That work was recorded in another subfolder. It was called simply long-term yield. Inside were projections for survivor population sizes, memory resilience, birth rates, and individual utility indexes. Cold mathematical charts assigning value to us, to the ones who lived through it, who scraped their lives out of collapsed cities and poisoned rivers and broken shelters. We weren't just being studied, we were being scored, judged, and when the average value fell too low, if we grew too fragmented, too tribal, too wild, there was a plan for that too. A document called Reclamation Delay Protocol Phase 2 described orbital reconnection procedures tied to the Enclave satellite network. It mentioned flash memory reduction initiatives, resource denial zones, and localized biological reactivation to suppress resurgence. That last phrase wasn't just jargon, it meant something I now understand all too well. If we tried to rebuild, they'd send more infected from cryo-storage, from vaults like this, from bunkers still hidden, from labs sealed under mountains, or frozen inside forgotten launch sites. Even the satellite network wasn't a passive system. It was active, a command structure, ready to wake dormant carriers or deploy agents to ensure civilization never stood up tall enough to see what had been done to it. This wasn't apocalypse. This was a managed extinction with an optional reset. All that's terrifying enough. But today, something else happened. While sifting through a broken archive tagged Propsim Year 2, I found a string of video logs. Most were corrupted, faces warped, audio garbled, but one was playable. A man in his late 50s, beard, glasses, hollow cheeks, sitting in what looked like a debrief room. His badge read, Doctor for Leonard Grange Affiliation, Office of Civil Dissonance Forecasting. I didn't even know that was a real thing. He looked tired, broken, but not afraid to say. Aid, he said. To whoever finds this, I wasn't part of the decision. I warned them. I told them memory degradation wouldn't result in peace. It would create shells, angry shells, lost shells. You strip away a man's past, you make him dangerous, not compliant. But they wouldn't listen. They wanted us empty. easier to fill with what they wanted, and now they're gone or hiding, and the world's full of monsters who don't know they were once fathers, daughters, scientists, soldiers. He looked down, then back up. You want to beat them? You want to stop them? Don't shoot the infected. Don't run. Don't hide. Remember, that's the only weapon they didn't account for. Remembrance, memory, stories passed forward, names said aloud. That's your fire. That's what survives. The file ends there. And I haven't been able to stop thinking about his words. Because he's right. The worst thing they did wasn't infect us, it was make us forget what came before. But I didn't grow up in the old world. I never saw it with my own eyes. I don't remember city lights or grocery stores or elections or open borders or even peace. I only know what I was told. But maybe that's enough. Maybe the fragments matter. Maybe passing on those pieces, those broken shards of what we used to be, is the last kind of rebellion we have left. So I'll do that now. My name is Adam. I'm 25 years old, born after the fall, raised by survivors who believed there would never be another morning. And I'm still here, not because someone saved me, but because I chose to remember what others wanted me to forget. And now that I've seen what was hidden, what they did, and how many they left behind, I won't shut up. I won't turn off the signal. I won't let the silence win. Maya and Daniel are on their way. 2 more days if the roads hold, and their battery packs don't fail. I'll be ready. I've reinforced the entry corridor. I've copied the archive 3 times. 1 for me, 1 for them, and 1 I'll bury in the rock outside the bunker, sealed in a rust-proof case. Because even if none of us make it back, someone might. And when they do, I want them to hear this story, to understand that the end of the world wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. And it was remembering that finally broke the chain. I woke today to the sound of metal warping, not loud, not close, but unmistakable. A slow groan from one of the eastern ventilation ducts. The kind of bending steel that comes when pressure builds too long in silence. I waited, listened. Nothing followed, no thuds, no footsteps, just that long, low exhale of this dying structure, shifting under its own weight. Except it wasn't the structure. Thermal sensors confirmed it. Sector D still had 1 moving heat source, not a survivor, not a ghost, one of the last infected that slipped through when the reactor came back online. I thought I'd cleared them all. 3 were neutralized 2 days ago. This one must have been hiding. Maybe dormant, maybe waiting for movement, maybe just trapped behind a panel I never thought to check. I couldn't leave it. The path to the access corridor was partly blocked. One of the power conduits had blown last night, likely due to the rerouted coolant system, so I had to crawl through a collapsed storage shaft to reach the east junction. It's narrow, lined with rusted wire shelves, brittle food containers, and a half-torn mural on the wall. I'd never noticed it before. Hand-painted at some point, probably decades ago, a pair of children holding hands under a tree. Bright colors, simple shapes, something left behind by someone who tried to make this place feel like it was still part of the world above. But the bloodstains that streaked across the trunks told the truth. This was never a refuge. It was a test chamber. I reached the junction and flicked the sensor relay. Faint movement on the far end, slow, deliberate. The infected was alone, possibly female based on build, though time and decay had taken most of the identifiers. I took my time. No loud noises, no direct light. I crept through the access duct until I was within sight of the main corridor. It stood facing the emergency light panel, head tilted, fingers twitching slightly, like it remembered touching buttons, but couldn't recall why. I didn't hesitate. I used one of the last magnesium sticks, lit it, and threw it at its feet. The reaction was instant. Heat and light sent the thing staggering backward into the wall. Before it could react, I dropped the grate, moved in, and drove the pipe through the back of its skull. No cry, no sound, just collapse, and then silence again. The last infected in the accessible zones of Bunker 12 is gone. I say that with the understanding that this place has surprised me before. There may still be more somewhere deeper. But every open corridor, every unsealed room, every ventilation shaft I can reach is now cleared. This facility, what remains of it, is finally mine, which means I can turn back to the data. The archives recovered from Sector K have begun decrypting more completely. Whatever protocol flagged me as a valid observer also lifted a lot of the restrictions I fought through earlier. The system trusts me now, for better or worse. It thinks I'm doing what it was built to guide. That scares me more than anything else. But it's opened new folders. One of them caught my attention. Immediate. Bunker status, tier 1 to 4 nodes. Last update cycle -1 421 days. Inside a full map. Not the bunkers we knew about, not just the 20 we'd heard whispered in survivor camps, but 39 distinct sites, each with a designation, each with an icon indicating status. Active, destroyed, unknown, compromised. Only 4 showed as fully operational. 2 were Bunker 2 and Bunker 12, both listed under Tier 0. We know Bunker 12 is barely functional and Bunker 2 remains silent. The others, Bunker 16. Location, deep in the Black Hills, formerly South Dakota. Designation, civil-military hybrid. Status, unknown. No signal. Uplink, offline. Bunker 21, location, Pacific Subduction Zone, deep-sea platform. Designation, containment overflow and memory reclamation site. Status destroyed. Loss of pressure. What stood out were not the active or unknown bunkers. It was the ones tagged as redirected. There were 3. Bunker 5, originally built beneath what used to be the southern Texas oil fields. Tag redirected to remote colony support. Operation rescinded. Bunker 11, Appalachian interior. Tag relocated systems. Personnel decommissioned. Bunker 28, no coordinates, no terrain data, just the line. Classified under or jurisdiction. Do not query. I searched for O, found it once in a redacted diplomatic memo from the early collapse period. Per continuity agreement with Oftet's adaptive retainers, any human settlement deemed non-compliant with behavioral baselines will be flagged for external review. Bunker 28 is to serve as the primary node for long-term monitoring. That tells me 2 things. 1, there were people or entities given control of bunker functions who weren't bound by the original government chain of command. 2, someone decided that the survivors themselves could become non-compliant, which raises a terrifying question. Who judged that? Who still judges that? And is that why Bunker 2 remains dark? Is it the final node, the last listening post for a system that once covered the whole continent? The documents suggest Bunker 2 never went offline. It simply stopped responding. One line in a file dated 19 years ago reads, per Watchtower Directive, Tier 0 Node 2 has transitioned to passive mode. Final review pending. Do not initiate reconnection until confirmation of cycle reset. What is a cycle reset? Is that what we're living in now, or is it what's coming next? I don't know yet. I'm trying to connect to more of the orbital records. There's mention of satellite RZV-4 again. Its signal pinged the bunker 3 hours ago. This time, not with a greeting, but with a query packet. It asked the system if observation metrics have been met. That's not routine behavior. That's evaluation language, which means the test isn't over. It might be reaching its conclusion, and maybe I've been triggering it just by surviving here, by digging, by remembering. But if that's the case, if remembering is the crime, then I'll break the system gladly. I've compiled a report for Maya and Daniel when they arrive. If something happens to me before then, I want them to have everything. Raw files, audio logs, coordinates to the known bunkers, uplink command chains. I'm putting a copy on analog tape, just like Jerry taught me years ago. I don't trust digital anymore. I don't trust the way this place seems to blink when I think too long about it. And tonight, I'll sleep. First time in days. No footsteps in the hall, no scratching at the doors, no whispers in the vents, just the hum of old servers and the weight of 100 years of secrets finally bleeding into the light. This is still my voice, this is still my mind, and as long as that remains, I'll keep the signal going, even if no one answers, because the world they built tried to make us forget, and remembering is how we end it. Broadcast active, this is Kessler. But I don't know how much longer I can hold out in here. It's not the infected, I've cleared them. It's not the structural integrity. So far the walls are old, the reactor is stable, and the air remains breathable. But I'm running out of food fast. The rations from the storage vault in Sector B are down to 3 packets, enough for maybe 2 days. Less if I stay active. Most of the cryoseed vault is intact, but I have no working hydroponics left to use them. The growth trays were overrun with mold months before I arrived. The UV strips above the racks flicker and pop, unreliable since the main reactor surged. Without a full rebuild and proper nutrient fluid, I can't grow anything here. This bunker was never meant to sustain one person indefinitely, let alone restart agriculture. Maya and Daniel are still 2 days out, maybe more if the weather's turned, or if they've been forced to take a long route. The roads near the Gulf have been unstable ever since the chemical floods. Whole highways swallowed by tree roots and broken earth. If they're forced to reroute through marshland or cut through the red clay corridors where the last militias used to patrol, it might take them longer than either of us predicted. That leaves me with limited options. But before I make any decisions about leaving or opening new sectors, I need to finish reviewing what I found in the satellite logs. The uplink to RZV-4, the satellite node that's been pinging the system since the reactor came back online, finally opened fully yesterday afternoon. Not because I accessed it, because it initiated a reverse handshake. I still don't know what it was waiting for. Maybe a threshold was met, a timer expired, or some critical signal condition from below was fulfilled. Either way, it granted me temporary access to a portion of its observational cache. 17 years worth of data, not environmental, not meteorological, behavioral. The satellites weren't just watching cities. They weren't scanning for re-emerging states or new governments. They weren't looking for radio signals from survivors. They were watching hordes. The logs contained time-stamped orbital captures of infected groupings. Starting just 6 months after the initial outbreak, when the virus had finished sweeping through the first wave of continental population centers. Early notes are clinical, detached. The infected are referred to not as people, not even as subjects, but as units. Movement patterns were mapped, thermal footprints tracked in real time. Infected populations were marked with colored indicators, blue for static clusters, yellow for roaming behavior, red for anomalies. Red units were the most studied. Often small in number, they showed abnormal movement patterns, sometimes making the same circuit over and over through ruined city blocks, sometimes staying dormant for weeks before moving all at once with terrifying synchronization. The early analysts didn't understand it, but they kept observing. Satellite logs note weather patterns, local power surges, chemical presence in nearby soil, and the proximity of living survivors. Then the behavioral tracking begins. Each horde is given a code H32.7, R14.1, D9.6, and so on. Some are shown migrating across hundreds of miles, seemingly aimless. But as I read more, a pattern emerged. The logs didn't just monitor movement, they stimulated it. A note in Year 5 describes a low-frequency broadcast test from a relay near former Boise, Idaho. The signal was broadcast into a static horde of roughly 2,000 infected. The result? Within 72 hours, that horde began migrating toward the signal's origin. Even after the broadcast had ended, further tests were run across decimated urban centers, wastelands, and what remained of the old safe zones. Similar results. The infected responded. That alone would be terrifying enough, but it doesn't stop there. The logs then begin referring to settlements. Names I recognize, small, hopeful names like Carson Grove, Harmony Ridge, and New Grantham. Places where scattered survivors once gathered and rebuilt. We'd heard stories growing up, whispers of safe towns where radio broadcasts still hummed and children were born without fear. Most of them never lasted more than a few years. Now I know why. Satellite imagery shows that each time a settlement's energy output crossed a certain threshold, or when their communication arrays stayed active longer than a week, infected migration increased in their direction, even if the infected were hundreds of miles away. One file even shows the confirmation of multiple drone-delivered transmitters being lost near settlements shortly before they were overrun. The logs don't say who deployed them, but they refer to the phenomenon as behavioral conditioning compliance tests. The infected were used as tools, steering mechanisms, punishment, control. You built too fast, you broadcast too loud, you got noticed. And they sent them. They let the infected do what fire, bombs, or orders could not. They let the silence return. The logs are filled with redacted comments, names blacked out, agencies replaced with strings of numbers, timestamps cut short. But one name does appear over and over, Watchtower Command. I've seen it before in connection with Bunker 2. One log references a review request from Watchtower Command for settlement R19, Kelmar's Rest, under passive observation protocol. The note says, no action authorized, uplink delay active, viability low, threat negligible, Kelmar's Rest, my home. We were spared because we weren't worth destroying. That hits harder than I expected. We weren't lucky. We were deemed irrelevant, not because we didn't survive, but because we didn't matter, not loud enough, not connected enough, not defiant enough. I always thought the infected spread because of chance. Now I see it wasn't random, it was curated. Entire migration paths were calculated, sometimes months in advance. All it took was power, heat, motion, light, any sign of recovery, and the silence was sent to erase it. And now with the satellite still functioning, if only partially, what happens if I send this broadcast to Absurfa?
If I reveal too much, will the system decide I've grown too loud? I'm sure it's listening. I just don't know what it's waiting for. But I have no intention of stopping. Not now, even if I starve. I've begun rationing the final food packets, 1/2 serving per day. I've lost weight. My hands shake sometimes, but I can still think, still move, still work. There are supply lockers in a sealed zone 2 levels down, Sector L. I didn't even know it existed until the satellite logs cross-referenced it as a low-utility support annex. I'll try to open it tomorrow. I've rerouted enough power to override 2 of the 4 doors. If I can find food, great. If not, then I have 3 days, maybe 4, before I won't be able to make the climb back up. Maya and Daniel are still on the road. I don't know if they'll get here in time, but I have to believe they will, because I won't be here just to meet them. I'll be here to hand them everything I found, everything that was stolen from us, buried, redacted, hidden beneath this quiet world. Because someone needs to keep the signal going when I can't. And someone has to make sure the satellites, our own eyes in the sky, don't just watch us until we're gone. They need to be answered, called out, brought down. We were never meant to survive, but we did. Now it's time to remember who tried to stop us and make sure the silence never comes again. This is Kesler. Good news, I found food. That might not sound like much, not in the grand scale of everything I've uncovered, everything I've risked, and everything that still waits beyond these walls. But today, it meant everything.
It meant one more day, one more broadcast, one more hour to dig deeper into the system that tried to erase us. Sector L was deeper than I expected, buried beneath the outer ventilation matrix, partially fused shut by a structural collapse that must have happened sometime in the second decade after the outbreak. The access shaft I used had been locked under a double-sealed panel marked Low Priority Maintenance. No civilian entry. I doubt anyone's touched it in years. It took nearly 5 hours to get in. I had to reroute power from the redundant life support circuit in Sector A, scavenging energy from unused dehumidifiers and heat loops that haven't run in a decade. That gave me enough juice to pry open the outer door. The inner seal didn't respond to the electronic override, but I remembered something Daniel once told me. Systems like these often default to mechanical fallback if exposed to pressure loss. He was right. I cracked open the emergency pressure valve beside the inner hatch, and the door unlocked with a soft hiss. Cold air wafted out, stale but not foul, dry, breathable. The chamber beyond had been sealed tightly enough to keep out decay, moisture, and most importantly, vermin. Inside were two things, a small storage depot and a server cluster. The depot was what I focused on first. Shelves lined with sealed ration boxes, survivor grade, likely packed in the early days of lockdown. Some had burst or rotted under their own compression, but most were still intact. Rough estimates put the total at 80 usable meals, enough to last me another 2 months if rationed carefully. For the first time in weeks, I ate without measuring every bite. Just one meal, one full meal, slowly, methodically, as I sat cross-legged on the floor with the storage light humming softly overhead. Peanut paste, rehydrated lentils, compressed bread puck. It might as well have been a feast to eat. Relief was short-lived. The server cluster in the far corner hummed softly as I approached. Unlike the cold banks in Sector K, this one was active. Its green status light pulsed steadily like a heartbeat. I'd seen this configuration before in simulation logs. It wasn't a data server. It was a communications node built as a bridge between the internal system and the greater Enclave network. The last time one of these nodes was active in a known bunker, it was linked directly to Bunker 2. This one was marked differently. Node chain 12A relay Zeta, Bunker 8. I froze when I saw the designation. Bunker 8 was believed to be lost. According to the files I pulled from the archival map, Bunker 8 was one of the 8 confirmed destroyed. The file said degraded integrity, civilian revolt, biohazard event, presumed total loss. There were no comms listed, no surviving architecture noted, just a red cross through its designation. But this server node here in my bunker was live, linked, listening. I checked the transmission log. The last incoming ping was 8 minutes ago. My hands moved without thinking. I activated the bridge, rerouted power through a temporary stabilization loop, and forced a secure uplink using the bunker's root key, something I never would have risked if I hadn't just eaten. Hadn't just confirmed I had enough time now to make real use of the truth. At first, nothing, just static. Then the screen flashed white. A line of text appeared. Uplink handshake accepted. Tier 2 command node. Active. Then came a voice, a man's voice, raspy, dry, but unmistakably human. To any active observer on Node 12, this is Command Specialist Tobias Hale, Bunker 8, confirming inbound relay. Standby. Please confirm status. I stared at the console, unsure if I should respond, unsure if I was allowed to. Then I pressed the mic key. This is Adam Kessler, observer. I guess I'm alone. Bunker 12, as partially intact. Infection neutralized, power restored. Communications live. I thought Bunker 8 was gone. The response came quickly. It is mostly, but not all of us. We locked down the lower levels before the breach. Biohazard event took the upper decks, but core ops in the comm shaft survived. We've been dark for 14 years. Power held just barely. No uplink until last week. Satellite tagged your activation. We've been listening. The voice paused, then added, "You have no idea how long we've been waiting to hear another voice." I didn't answer right away because I do know. I've been living it. He continued, "If you've got access to full relay permissions, I can patch you into the Tier 2 system. That means access to the shared data grid, old directives, facility conditions, even partial satellite routines. But you need to be sure because once you connect, they'll see you." He didn't mean the infected. He meant the system, the enclave, the buried architecture, still listening, still ranking, still judging whether we've earned back our memory. I told him I was already in too deep to stop now. "Patch me in," I said. "If I'm already flagged, I'll want to know what for." The screen split, 2 windows left, status feed of Bunker 8. Power levels, air quality. 6 confirmed survivors. They've been subsisting on synthetic protein harvested from bioreactors that were never meant to run more than 5 years. They're dying slowly, but they're fighting. Right. A feed. I didn't expect to see satellite footage. Not of us, of the outside world, the Southern Reach, what used to be the Panama Corridor, last defined border before the Final Border Act dissolved national sovereignty. The footage was recent. Infected were moving south, not shambling, not drifting, moving deliberately, organized. And they weren't heading for settlements, they were heading for something else. The file was tagged Migration Event Zone Delta, timestamp 4 days ago. The infected were converging on an area with no known radio output, no heat signature, no survivor colonies. Hale said the satellite registered a surge underground. Heat flare, movement, then silence, just like what happened in the early years, just like what happened before we lost all the cities, and just like what happened to the bunkers that got too close to the truth. "Something's waking up," Hale said, "something old. And I think you're the only one outside our walls who knows what that means." He asked me to hold position. Said they'd try to route a burst transmission through the relay so that Maya and Daniel, if they were still en route, could intercept it. Said if we could confirm 3 points of contact, we could attempt to break the Tier Deal lockdown on Bunker 2. That's the goal now. That's where this road leads. To the one bunker no one has spoken to in decades, to the command node at the heart of the network that decided who lived and who didn't. If it's still listening, maybe we can force it to speak. I've got food now, I've got power. And for the first time since I was born, I've got real connection to another bunker, maybe even to others. I'm scared, but I'm not alone. And I'm not staying silent, not anymore. Kesler live. New signal, new knowledge. The day started with an alert, not from motion sensors or reactor warnings, but from the comms relay. A short, coded ping relayed from Bunker 8, just a pulse, followed by a half-second of modulated static and a data string. Tobias Hale had pushed through the first segment of the Tier 2 access key. It was crude and partial, not enough to break into Bunker 2, but it unlocked one of the buried archival modules in Bunker 12 that I hadn't even known existed. Hidden in the lowest directory of the relay's root system was a file titled Tier 0 Oversight Satellite Observation and Contingency Metrics. It read like a summary, a master report compiled periodically by Enclave's hidden core, likely intended for Bunker 2's command staff and whoever still sat behind the curtain after the old government disappeared. The more I read, the more I understood the full shape of the machine we've been living inside. The infected weren't just studied, they weren't just manipulated or tracked, they were graded. Each horde was observed from space. RZV-4 and at least 2 other orbital platforms. Using heat signature tracking, swarm density analysis, and satellite-induced pulse imaging, They catalogued not only movement and size, but behavior. The system had a scale, cognitive retention index. It ranked infected on a scale from 0 to 9, based on responsiveness to environmental stimuli, reaction to electromagnetic fields, and internal pathfinding capacity. Most hordes fell between 0.5 and 2.2, basic reflexes drawn to heat and sound, directionless. But a rare few ones that moved in deliberate patterns, ones that reacted to light fluctuation or signal change, ranked as high as 7.4. Those were the anomalies, and they were of particular interest to Tier 0 Command. The logs referred to these anomalies with clinical names: pathfinders, signal adapters, proximity anchors. But Hale and I both understand now what they really were: remnants, infected that retained enough neurological architecture to follow routines, recognize doors, interact with dormant systems, possibly even remember. Walker 17, the infected that lingered near, are the control panel outside my door in the first week, the one that stood still instead of charging, that turned toward consoles instead of blood. It wasn't broken, it was remembering. I found a line buried halfway through the report. Pathfinder clusters appear drawn not to sound or light, but to signal residue, behavioral echoes, locations associated with repeated human activity or patterns of control. I read it 3 times. It confirmed what I've begun to suspect. The infected weren't just drawn to survivors. They were drawn to memory itself. Places that meant something, rooms where orders were given, sites of conflict, broadcast towers, outposts, bunkers. Here, that's why Bunker 12 never flooded with infected, even after going dark. It wasn't forgotten. It was respected, feared, avoided. But now that I've reactivated it, now that I've dug up all the old bones and whispered them into the air, the memory signature of this place is rising. Hale says RZV4 logged a minor horde migration some east of my position just 2 days ago. Could be random, but I don't believe in random anymore. Hale patched in again, late this afternoon. His voice was weaker. He said one of their oxygen compressors had ruptured. They lost one of their 6, a woman named Sasha. No last name, just another name added to the silence. He asked how long I had. I told him I had food, power, oxygen, but that I could feel something closing in. Not physically, not yet, but systemically, like the framework around me was beginning to shift. Directories that were accessible yesterday are now blank. Logs I read just this morning now show unauthorized access warnings when I try to open them. The system is watching me, not in real time, not with eyes, but with metrics. I've tripped some line buried in its logic tree. Hale says I'm close to triggering a full Tier 0 handshake. If I do, Bunker 2 may reactivate. It could open its relay. It could flood this entire half of the continent with the truth buried in its hard lines, or it could initiate a final sterilization protocol. He doesn't know. Neither do I. But the deeper I dig, the more I realize what's at stake. These bunkers were never about saving lives. They were about saving control. Control over narrative, over history, over what gets passed forward and what's allowed to be remembered. And the satellites above, they weren't eyes in the sky. They were mirrors, watching to see if we would rebuild in the right image, if we would repeat the story the way we were meant to. The infected weren't the punishment. They were the editors. Erase the sentence. Start again. Erase the settlement. Build nothing in its place. But something went wrong. Someone like me survived long enough to learn. And now we're speaking, and the system is listening. As night fell, I finally activated the Tier 2 relay in full. It took everything, rerouting the reactor's tertiary coils, diverting coolant to auxiliary systems, nearly frying the comms module. But it worked. The final sequence uploaded. The message went out. 30 seconds later, Bunker 2 responded. No voice, no text, just a hum. A low rising tone, barely audible, more vibration than sound. But it was a response. It means someone, something heard me. The screen lit up with a single word, query. I stared at it for a long time, unsure if it was asking me to ask or if it was waiting for one of its own questions to trigger. I typed why. It hesitated, then answered. To reduce. I typed again. To reduce what? Error. I leaned back. Bunker 2 doesn't see us as people. It sees us as variables. And the infected, they're not a threat. In its language, they're a solution. Hale says we need to get to Bunker 2 physically, that accessing the deeper functions, deactivating the uplink grid, stopping the next migration event, can only be done from inside. He asked if I'd go. I said yes. He didn't ask why. He already knows. Because this isn't about survival anymore. It's about memory. It's about ending the low. Breaking the system and choosing, maybe for the first time in 100 years, to tell our own story. The food I found gives me enough time to prep. The path ahead is uncertain. I'll need to plan to reconnect with Maya and Daniel to move carefully and not trigger another alert. But the bunker has shifted. The air tastes different. The hum in the walls is louder now. The system knows what I am. Not just an observer, not just a remnant, but a witness. And I'm not going quiet. Not now. Not ever. The channel's open again, and you're listening to a guy who used to think the end of the world 50 years ago was an accident. I don't believe that anymore. And they came back today. At 5:17, my handheld receiver gave a soft double click. Our old signal, the analog fallback we established years ago, in case every digital channel failed. It was Maya. Her voice came through clear and close despite the distance still between us. She sounded tired, hollow, but alive. Adam, confirm location, approaching main ridge, 2 clicks out. Daniel with me. Open shaft door. Repeat. Approaching now. I stood so fast I nearly knocked over the ration box beside the comms booth. My hands trembled as I keyed the old manual relay, dropping the outer lock clamps from the surface shaft. The gears groaned, fighting through corrosion and inertia, but they obeyed. The access seals slid open beneath the camouflage netting we'd strung years ago when we first scouted this place. Back when we still believed the world might give us peace if we just found a corner dark enough to hide in. 20 minutes later, they stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the dirt, not on their clothes. Those were clean, too clean for the road, but on their faces, smudged like ash, like the kind that hangs in the air after firestorms. Daniel's left sleeve was torn and bound with salvaged wire. Maya limped slightly, favoring her right leg, but they both stood straight, alive. Mia didn't speak at first, just crossed the distance between us and grabbed my shoulder, pulling me into a brief, tight hug. She held longer than she ever had before, then stepped back. Daniel looked around the entryway, noting the dimmed lights and sealed doors. You cleared it, I nodded. Every room we could reach, infected, neutralized, the cores stable, satellite uplink, re-established. He blinked, then looked to Maya. You told him? She shook her head slowly. Not yet. That's when I realized something was wrong. I led them to the comms hub, offering water and half a ration each, though they waved it off. Said they'd eaten just before hitting the perimeter. I watched them move, the subtle tension in their shoulders. The glances exchanged, but not explained. Something had happened. Finally, I asked, "What's going on?" Maya didn't answer right away. She sat across from me at the console, her fingers tapping lightly on the metal edge. We made it back to Kelmar's Rest, she said. The place is still there, not untouched, but standing. The outer wall is half gone. The northern turbines were dismantled, not destroyed, taken. By raiders? I asked. She shook her head. No, they were salvaged cleanly like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Tools, equipment, even battery cores, and they left notes. That word stopped me cold. Notes pinned to the wall of the comm shack, Daniel said. Burned edges, typed, not written. Addressed to Node 12 Observer. I stared at them. Me? He nodded. They knew you were here, knew what you found. I felt the blood drain from my face. What did the note say? Maya reached into her pack and slid a sealed plaster.
I envelope across the table. Inside a single sheet, yellowed, water-stained. One sentence printed in block letters. You woke the system. It's watching now. No name, no symbol, no origin. I opened my mouth to speak, but before the words formed, Daniel dropped a second item onto the table. A photo, old, creased, pulled from someone's pocket long ago and kept through fire and rain. It showed a control room, a man standing at a terminal. My father, I'd only seen 2 pictures of him my whole life. One from before the outbreak, the other a Polaroid from the day I was born. Tattered, water-damaged, barely holding together. This was different. It was recent. He was older, thinner, grey in the beard, but unmistakable. Where did you get this? Daniel looked at me carefully. There's more. The salvagers, the ones who stripped the tower and left that note. They didn't take everything. They left behind a recording. Audio 1 minute long, encrypted, but the signal format matched the bunkers. I played it on the secondary receiver. At first, static, then a voice. Familiar Adam. If this reaches you, if you're alive and you've accessed the core, you're in danger. Not from the infected, not even from the satellites. From them, the architects. The ones who designed this world to collapse. The ones who stayed behind in the quiet while we screamed. I sat frozen. They're not gone. They're waiting. And they know you're remembering. The recording ended. Daniel stepped back. We didn't think it was real either until we found the secondary cache west of the old radio mast, buried deep, locked under a relay circuit.
Maya reached into her coat and handed me a chipped data slate. Blueprints, she said. Communications control infrastructure, fallback routes, and access credentials Tier 0 full. I stared at it. Who left it? She looked at me. Your father. Silence fell over the room. Not from fear, not yet, just the weight of realization, of a life I thought ended in the dirt near a raider's torch, now reappearing in fragments. He survived, I said, voice low. For a time, Daniel answered. Maya looked away. We think he made it to Bunker 2, or at least near it. The data on that drive, it's encoded with their handshake pattern. I blinked. He tried to shut it down. Daniel nodded or hijack it, but something went wrong. Maya stood, pulling the satellite schematic from her pack and laying it across the console. The uplink is still active, but if we use this code, if we inject the override, we can disrupt the loop, force Bunker 2 to respond not as command, but as client. We take control, I whispered. Exactly, she said. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The silence that followed was sharp, full of weight. Then the low tone returned, soft, steady, unmistakable. The same one from 2 days ago, the same one I thought had been just a malfunction or a warning, but never a message. The screen flickered. Then came the line of text, cold and final. Observer network established. Query detected. Termination protocol in review. Maya leaned in, her voice barely audible. It's watching. Daniel didn't hesitate. His hand went to the relay switch, eyes locked on mine. So are we. I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to explain. This isn't a story anymore. It's a signal. And whoever's still listening, this is your proof. The system saw us as variables. Now we're rewriting the equation. That's all for now. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams.